Good morning to you. We are live from Johannesburg, the city of gold. Yes, it's a wonderful spring day here on the Highveld Hills.
Well, yes, of course, it's a bright Tuesday outside here, and of course the focus today is on the Constitutional Court, which is expected to hear the economic freedom fighters' bid to oust the president and to impeach him today, Kendall.
Another one. There's been quite a few that have been in the running, attempts to impeach President Jacob Zuma, but we want to find out from you, to bring you into the conversation, we want to find out from you, what do you make of the EFF application to impeach President Jacob Zuma?
Yeah, we'll be live at the Constitutional Court shortly after 10 o'clock to this morning when they go into session to bring you that. But let's have a look now at what you are saying with regards to this, obviously.
Michael Big M Sotole says, boredom at its best. I think they are running out of ideas on how to grow the party. So Jay-Z is the solution. They are becoming like a mini. DA.
Makawa comes in with EFF has been dominant in making quick decisions without a proper plan, which is a weakness in politics. Let Jay-Z finish his term peacefully.
Yeah. Resilience, that's what's needed in politics, they tell me, and the president has shown that. Of course, the one thing that's concerning, of course, this overnight, ANC Youth League leader, Sindiso Magaka, passed away. Political killings, once again, sharply into focus, and we're kind of running out of ideas. Yes, the Marana Commission is working, but how do we curb this kind of thing? And we put it to the vote.
Yes, that's why we're asking you this question on the poll today. We want to find out from you. How do we curb these political killings? Do we, A, have more arrests and convictions, or B, political intervention? What is the solution? Well, there you have it. 58% of you are saying we need more arrests and convictions, and only 42% are saying we need political intervention.
Onuka comes in with, we need aggressive policing, sincere investigation, thorough overhaul of the political mindset. Politics is a game, not a war.
For some it is. The benefits are so big these days. Jamila van der Schijf tweets us, says, political intervention would make the matter worse, as one of the government officials could be guilty of these killings. I say arrest them, says Jamila van der Schijf. Yes, no doubt about what some people believe will be the answer. I personally think a variety of all these things are needed to come to terms with what's happening. And it's not just in KwaZulu-Natal anymore.
It's a lot
to spread
more.
A little bit.
Yes, it's not just political intervention, it's also community intervention. It's also about the public participating in this entire process.
Yeah.
Yep, there's a fear factor. Talking about a fear factor.
Oh, yes.
Bafana fans have got a fear factor today.
Absolutely. Bafana have set themselves a bit of a mountain to climb out in Durban. And just to remind you what we're talking about, here's the scoreline. Cape Verde against South Africa from last week. What do you think is going to happen tonight?
Will they redeem themselves? That's what we're putting to the question, of course. Redeem themselves. Will Bafana do that? You have your views on Stuart Bacher, Elvis?
Well, he will not take a backseat, we believe, but let's take a look at what Katlego is saying. I hope so, because they dominated the last game, and I hope they rectify the mistakes.
Michael Big M, he's got something to say. He says they better redeem themselves if they know what's good for them. And with the correct lineup and our overseas best players, we can do this.
That is not a threat, I tell you. That is just normal fare here in South Africa. Better redeem yourselves, Bafana, or else. That's the way to put them out onto the park today. It will be broadcast live on all the SABC platforms this evening. It's a massive game for South Africa. Let's hope that they can get over the finish line today. But let's get into our work this morning.
The Constitutional Court hears the EFF application seeking to force Parliament to hold the President accountable. Meanwhile, Parliament will later debate the DA's motion for the dissolution of Parliament and the subsequent early elections that might follow. And the ANC is concerned over the current political killings in KZN following the death of the former youth leader, Sindiso Magaka. Those are your headlines, but before we get there, let's find out from Kendall Makamate what's happening on the sports front.
It's a massive night for Bafana, and you know, we're trying to get into the World Cup. Cameroon is out, but you know, I am getting ahead of myself. It's a big day in sports.
Yeah, it's a massive day for Bafana, and I think a massive day for South African supporters.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, there you have it. We've got quite a lot to cover today, and a lot of it has got to do with a little bit with the football that's coming up tonight. This is what we've got for you today. A resurgent Rafael Nadal dominates Alexander Dolgopolov in straight sets to advance to US Open quarterfinals for the first time since winning it back in 2013.
And Dolgopolov missing there. Rafa Nadal moves on.
Our players are certainly looking to take revenge on themselves rather than on their opponents.
As we said earlier, Bafana have a shot at World Cup qualification redemption tonight when they face Cape Verde in Durban on the back of a 2-1 away defeat to the island nation last week. African champions Cameroon will not be at the World Cup in Russia after losing 5-1 on aggregate to West African rivals Nigeria in the qualifiers.
Still not over. There's the goal. Nigeria have found the back of the net.
By all accounts, it's been a very interesting and riveting qualifying campaign across the continent. All this and more later on in the Sports Bulletin. Do stay with Elvis as he's got the news.
Thank you, Kendall. Top story this morning. Today, the Constitutional Court will hear an application by the economic freedom fighters which seek to force Parliament to have the President Jacob Zuma held accountable over the Nkandla saga. Now, the application, which is supported by 3 other opposition parties, including the Democratic Alliance, stems from last year's Constitutional Court Nkandla judgment, which found that the President had breached his oath of office. The parties argue that Parliament's inaction since the ruling constitutes a violation of its constitutional obligation to hold the executive accountable.
In 2014, former Public Protector Thuli Madonsela did not only find that President Jacob Zuma's family benefited unduly from the 246 million rand Nkandla upgrades, she also found that the president violated the Executive Ethics Code by failing to protect state resources. 2 years later, the Constitutional Court found another breach. The president failed to uphold, defend and respect the Constitution, while it ruled that Parliament's failure to hold the executive accountable was unconstitutional. But the court carefully explained its limited powers.
It falls outside the parameters of judicial authority to prescribe to the National Assembly how to scrutinize executive action, what mechanisms to establish and which mandate to give them.
The EFF acknowledges these limitations in its court papers. However, it seeks a declaratory order that Parliament has again failed in its duty to hold the President accountable on both the Public Protector's findings and the court ruling.
Even if they were to say, this is not a serious violation, let us come to that conclusion, but through a legitimate, genuine process which everybody else will accept.
In the secret ballot judgment, the Constitutional Court points out that Parliament has various mechanisms to hold the executive accountable. These, it says, include questions and answer sessions which the President has subjected himself to. The judgment further states that at times these mechanisms may be insufficient.
The Constitution provides for 2 processes in terms of which the President may be removed from office. First, impeachment, which applies where there is a serious violation of the Constitution or the law, serious misconduct or an inability to perform the functions of the office. Another related terminal consequence or supreme accountability tool in between general elections is a motion of no confidence.
The EFF wants the President hauled in front of a parliamentary inquiry despite his apology.
I never knowingly or deliberately set out to violate the Constitution.
The EFF says the President's conduct warrants an impeachment, but concedes that the discretion rests with Parliament. But impeachment would require a 2/3 majority vote. Alderan Simpier, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Now, on that story, we will shortly cross to our reporter, Aldrin Sampier, who is at the Constitutional Court to give us the latest on the story. And a little bit later in the program, we'll also speak to an expert, a legal expert here in our studios, Professor Mia Swartz. She's a legal expert as well as Professor of International Law at the University of Johannesburg. We'll be speaking to her shortly on the issue. Meanwhile, the DA's motion for the dissolution of Parliament and early elections will be debated in Parliament today. But most opposition parties don't really support it.
How ready would South Africa be for general elections in December? If the motion passes, the poll would have to happen within 90 days. The IEC is currently burdened with the task of revamping the voters list. Some say parties won't be ready either.
I think also, it's surprising that there's such a call for an early general election, because I think none of the political parties can be confident following the Ipsos survey that was revealed yesterday, which shows that support for the three major political parties has all fallen from 2014 and 2016 figures. The ANC is sitting at less than 47% nationally. But that must be seen in the context that there are a large number of undecided voters. So that could change, but I think it means that political parties have a lot of work to do before the next election happens.
The DA is calling for the support of MPs across party lines. It's denied rumours that its caucus is not unanimous on the motion. But what do the most important players in this game say?
Because I'm tired of ANC, of Zuma. Throughout.
Because I want change in the country, because the country's like mess up.
I think the elections would be a very good idea to have it in a bit earlier, because I think it would be, we can resolve the problems relating to the things why the people are striking and so forth much easier.
The majority of parties in Parliament do not agree. They say it will be impossible to raise funds for campaigning. Abra Barbia, SABC News, Parliament.
The African National Congress has paid tribute to former ANC Youth League Secretary General Sindiso Magaka. He died at a Durban hospital yesterday. He was 35 years old. Magaka succumbed to gunshot wounds that he suffered in an ambush in July. He was the ward councillor for Mzimkhulu in southern KwaZulu-Natal. ANC spokesperson Zizi Kodwa said that Magaka was part of a generation of young people in the ANC who had fought tirelessly for economic freedom. Magaka was part of the ANC Youth League's top 6 in 2015 with the then President Julius Malema, before being suspended in 2012 for making statements against senior party leaders. The ANC has expressed concern over the political killings in KwaZulu-Natal, saying they have the potential of destabilizing the country. The party's statement comes after the death of the ANC Youth League former National Secretary General Sindiso Magaka. He died yesterday after succumbing to his wounds sustained when he was shot in an ambush in July. He was a ward councillor. His ex-colleague and former deputy president of the ANC Youth League, Ronald Lamola, was in our studios a little bit earlier, and our anchor, Leanne Manners, asked him to describe his feelings this morning.
I am very sad and heartbroken because I know that after the activities in the Youth League, all of us from that NEC were now beginning to pick up our lives, both politically and personally. And Magaka was part of that group, which was now beginning to pick up his life personally. And I know he was beginning to have a family, and his family is heartbroken like everyone else, and I want to send my condolences to them and to all his other relatives in Mzimkhulu. He decided to go back home, participate there, and that was a life of a man who said, after the lives of Johannesburg, everything must end in my hometown of Mzimkhulu. So I'm very much heartbroken because I know what he has been going through. We have been a family in that NEC, all of us, including with him and everyone. We could still call each other when things were difficult, to assist each other. And even in that NEC, the camaraderie of comradeship was beyond any reproach. All of us believed we're a family. We could, even beyond the NEC life of the youth league, still find each other from that 35 members, even those that have left to join the EFF, the familyhood is still there and was still there. So it's very, very, very sad for us.
Yeah. How would you describe, oh gosh, I think we may have dropped the line. We'll try and get him back on the line. We would like to ask him one or two more questions, but it seems like that line has dropped. But we'll continue to talk about this and cover the story of the passing of Sindiso Magaka. Ronald Lamola was on the line talking to us about his memory and just some stories about him. But of course, the ANC mourning this loss. They put a press release out last night saying that they received the news of the passing of a young lion and one of our movement's most brave and fearless fighters. And we'll continue to talk to Ronald a bit later on in the program. Ronald, are you back on the line?
Yes.
Good. All right. I'm glad we got you back. If I can just ask you for your personal impressions of him, and as a revolutionary, as a fighter, what stood out for you about his persona and him as a political giant?
Magaka was unflinching, uncompromising, and stood by his conviction. He was that generation when we had resolutions. He said we must never at any day think about abandoning or retreating from those resolutions on economic freedom, the nationalization of mines, the expropriation of land without compensation, and many other progressive resolutions that the Youth League took in that 2011 conference when we declared ourselves as a generation of economic freedom fighters. I remember at the time, there was a time when he was suspended and he was supposed to apologize. We ourselves behind the scene will say, but SG, please, man, just apologize so that at least we've got the strength, because they've already expelled the president, they've expelled Floyd, so that at least you can come back to destruction. He will always say, no, Lamola, comrades, we cannot do that because we must not demoralize our foot soldiers on the ground. The foot soldiers are ready to fight for the autonomy of the Youth League. We must never compromise. And even ourselves, if we are taken out, we will be the casualties of this battle. You comrades must soldier on. So that was the kind of a character. But he was also had humility. Myself and him were usually confused because we almost had the same features. People could differentiate us with the gap, but there were those who could not differentiate. They would see Magaka and think it's myself, and see me and think I'm Magaka. So sometimes in the NEC, we'll say, no, maybe this NEC must resolve who is better handsome between me and him. And we will take that in a very light-hearted way. But at the end, I will remember him as a person who stood by his conviction.
Yeah. You know, the reality is that there has still been no arrests due to his shooting, which happened in July. The cases and the hearings, obviously, into it still continue. But, you know, just something like this, the incident of the violence that's happening in KwaZulu-Natal, I mean, this is now bringing a whole new twist to it, isn't it?
Indeed, it's very painful because across the country, when political activists are being murdered like this, usually there is no conclusion in terms of investigation, in terms of closing the matter. And I think that's what it is also very painful that this happened at a time when there's the Moerane Commission in KwaZulu-Natal, which is looking at this question. It's a really heartbreaking that there have been many cases of this nature. I know in 2012 there was the same in KwaZulu-Natal of a Youth League leader, Wandile Mkhize. It is still not yet resolved, and there are many unresolved cases across the country of this nature. And I hope that the powers that be and the authorities will pull everything that they have so that the family of Comrade Magaka will find closure. But I also believe beyond the current commission, which I think is doing a very good job because there are many people who are making recommendations of what must happen, I think this is an issue that the National Assembly must also debate and come up with clear, concrete proposals, because I think we cannot wait any longer for many lives to be taken away, because this was a young life, and we still hope that he will contribute a lot to the struggle of this country. But anyway, we will want to say to him and his family that all is not well. But we are going to continue to soldier on like he did.
A disturbing story indeed, and of course that's why we're asking you this question in our poll. What do we need to do about this to curb the political killings? Do we need more arrest and convictions or political intervention? There you have it. 65% of you are saying we need more arrest and convictions, and 35% are saying that we need political intervention. Talking about politics, and of course the Constitutional Court is up and running. Let's start our conversation today because it's all happening at the Constitutional Court. It's over to Eben.
Yeah, thank you very much, Charles. A very good morning to you. Now, the main story today. According to our constitutional law expert, Peter Vos, he says both the EFF and the National Assembly Speaker, Baleka Mbete, have sound legal grounds on which to argue today's case in the Constitutional Court. Now, the EFF, of course, brought the case on the grounds that Baleka Mbete failed to take action against President Jacob Zuma following the court's ruling that he violated his oath of office. Now, this is for failing to implement the public protector's remedial action that he paid back the money spent on non-security upgrades at his Nkandla home. Now, for more on what we can expect at the Constitutional Court today, let's go live to our reporter, Aldrin Sampier, outside the court. Very good morning to you, Aldrin. Just set the scene for us. I understand you've got the EFF with you who's making the application, but what's happening there?
Well, yes, good morning. In about a few minutes from now, we will have the constitutional justices who will come through and sit and listen to this application, which has been brought by the EFF and, of course, supported by 3 other political parties, the UDM and the DA, as well as COPE, that Parliament has failed in its parliamentary duties to institute an inquiry into President Jacob Zuma's conduct post post Public Protector Thuli Madonsela's findings back in 2014, but also post last year's Constitutional Court ruling that the President failed to uphold, defend and respect the Constitution. And I have with me here the Secretary General of the EFF, Godrich Gadi. Just before we get into this matter of today, this morning and last night, of course, we heard of breaking news of Sindiso Makaka, who has now passed on. Just a message of condolences from the EFF. We also saw that the CIC of the EFF has also sent his message of condolences.
Thank you very much, Aldrin, and to your viewers. We have issued a statement as the economic freedom fighters, sending our condolences to the family, his friends, relatives, and his colleagues in the ANC. We call upon the stoppage of such shenanigans and dedicate all political killings, and hope that Mr. Zuma will realize that in his presidency, almost close to 100 members of the society who are political activists have died in his nose at his backyard in KwaZulu-Natal.
Just quickly, one of the questions that we're asking, the polls that we're running currently, is asking the question, what should be done to stop these political killings? We've seen that now there's this commission, there's this inquiry at the moment, but what do you think should be done extra? Because even though you have this inquiry, the killings still continue.
Well, the source of the killings is corruption. We just have to deal with corruption. The moment we remove Mr. Zuma from office, we can assure you that the political killings will stop, particularly in KwaZulu-Natal and throughout South Africa. As you will know that the Speaker of Mpumalanga, somewhere in Mbombela municipality, died because of corruption. Bomba in Mpumalanga died because of corruption. Many other activists and leaders in Northwest and Free State are dying because of corruption. So if we can deal with corruption by removing Mr. Zuma from office, we can assure you that over and above that, there will be a stoppage of political killings and also increase and capacitate the intelligence and detective units of the country.
At the center of today's court application is actually the removal of the president. But now what the EFF is seeking is the declaratory order that Parliament has failed in its constitutional duty to hold the president liable, but also that the proceedings should be instituted to hold the president accountable and to look into the conduct of the president in this whole Nkandla saga. Just unpack it a bit for us.
Well, as a matter of fact, the Speaker is aware that Section 89 of the Constitution is different from a Section 102 motion of no confidence. A motion of no confidence is only a debate and thereafter a vote. But Section 89 specifically provides that there should be an inquiry before a debate. An inquiry is wherein the accused will appear before the ad hoc committee together with his or her witnesses who must give evidence, be examined and cross-examined, so the committee will also subpoena all relevant people to come. In this particular case of Nkandla, the ministers of public works, deputy ministers of public works, the director general, the ground forces of supply chain management, and the contractors, they have to take a stand in the committee, probably for 3 or 6 weeks. Thereafter, the committee will have to adjourn into a closed session, deliberate, and table a report to the National Assembly, wherein it will be debated, and thereafter a vote will take place. That is very different from a motion of no confidence, wherein it's just straight to a debate and a vote.
In your court papers, the EFF makes it clear that it is not within this jurisdiction of this court to tell Parliament what to do. It cannot instruct Parliament how to exercise its power. Then what exactly is it that the EFF wants this court to tell Parliament in terms of its power and in terms of holding the executive accountable? Because they've done it in 2 other cases, the Nkandla case as well as the secret vote case.
Well, as a matter of fact, we would like a situation wherein the court directs Parliament to set up an inquiry as to how the inquiry is composed, what will be its procedures and proceedings, what determination it should reach at. It should be left to the committee members of Parliament. But as a matter of fact, the court has got a duty to assist Parliament to do the right thing constitutionally.
Let's speak about the impeachment, should it happen. Should this impeachment and or even the inquiry or ahead of the impeachment happen. The Constitution says that you need about a 2/3 majority for the impeachment to be successful, unlike a motion of no confidence where you just need 50% plus 1. If the motion of no confidence, the recent one, is anything to go by, it's probably unlikely that the impeachment would be successful, considering that now you need a 2/3 majority.
Definitely not, Aldrin. You will recall that all along, every time there was such an attempt to remove the president, there could not have been such a margin of almost 40 to 45 or even 1. And in this particular instance, once the Parliament has arrived at a determination that the president has seriously misconducted himself and contravened the Constitution and his oath of office, definitely the conscience of our colleagues on the other side of the bench, as we have seen that almost 40 to 45 voted with the opposition on the motion of no confidence, we can only look forward to the best of the best and the cadres of the ANC actually doing what is right for the country and not what is right for Mr. Zuma.
8 attempts to try and remove President Jacob Zuma from Parliament. He was even saying when he spoke the last time in Parliament that he expects even by December that there would have been 10 motions of no confidence in trying to remove him. And we've seen now that the DA has tabled a motion for the dissolution of Parliament. Where does the EFF stand on this one?
Well, that's one of the reasons why we are having a problem with the Democratic Alliance, in that they are bullying the opposition, and for no apparent reason they are not consulting the opposition on matters of national importance. This is not about ideological, political philosophy of each other party, but it's about a matter of national importance, wherein you have to take some other stakeholders on board and agree with them on certain things that must be done. We will definitely not support the motion. It is out of order. It is just not necessarily, and it's premature because we have got an impeachment case which we must deal with today.
Would you say that it's back to the drawing board for you guys in the DA? Are you willing to sit down if the DA decides to withdraw that application?
Definitely, they have to learn to humble themselves before the rest of the other members and leaders of the opposition parties and withdraw that motion, failure which I think they are setting a bad precedence towards 2019, when more likely the politics of coalition will have to be revisited.
And that's the interesting thing, though, apparently with these dynamics between especially the EFF and the DA in terms of the coalitions as well as the working together of these various opposition parties, what's happening in Nelson Mandela Bay as well. We see that there seems to be tension and questions have been raised what this means for 2019 if there's possibly a coalition government that would be set up.
Well, the problem with the DA is that they are a federal organization wherein every structure takes its own decision in every geographical corner where it is. It's not bound whatever their national leaders say to them. The issue of Nelson Mandela was very opportunistic in that the DA realized that they can form a government without the support and cooperation of the economic freedom fighters, and went ahead, and now they are reaping their own results of their own deeds in that they close the economic freedom fighters out, and they must live with the consequences. Otherwise, we are not part of their problem. We never caused their problem. In fact, it was the EFF that assisted them to pass the budget on the 31st of July, failure which, if the EFF did not do so, that municipality will be no different from Ngutu and Metsimahulu. There would have been an election rerun.
Godrich Gadi, Secretary General of the EFF, thank you so much for your time. Well, interesting political times indeed that the country finds itself in, whether we move from the political killings to attempts to try and remove President Jacob Zuma, or even the state of coalition politics in the country. Different things happening all across the country, and the importance of politics as it stands at the moment, and what this means for 2019 and the state of politics, and probably what this means for the ANC if the EFF as well as the other opposition parties today become successful in trying to force Parliament to set up an inquiry into President Jacob Zuma's conduct with regards to the Nkandla matter, and how his response would be to the finding by the Public Protector, which is something that we shouldn't forget. Not only did the Public Protector find that President Jacob Zuma's family benefited unduly from the upgrades, but it also found that President Jacob Zuma's conduct was in breach of the Executive Ethics Code by failing to protect state resources. It's back to you in studio.
Yeah, thanks, Aldrin. I'll leave you to round up two more other stakeholders there at the court. Of course, they're friends of the court. Corruption Watch, actually, they're friends of the court there today in this action that's before the Constitutional Court. It should be live in about half an hour's time. We'll go there to get the outcomes of this important matter in the South African political landscape. Of course, we're running a question today. We're asking you that question on screen. What do you make of the EFF's application to impeach President Jacob Zuma? Once again, one can even add, because 8 lives, 8 times the president has survived, they say. Peter M.A. tweets us. He says, Newsroom, it's just another waste of time. Jay-Z, for those of you watching outside, that's President Jacob Zuma. He's going nowhere, they say. Mandla tweets us. He says, shame, let them try again, but they won't win. This one from Mimani says, Newsroom, I still say they need to join the DA for the early elections because Zuma won't be impeached. Trust me on that. Interesting you would say that, of course. Ipsos have come out and they say, well, if elections were to be held now, there would be a real change in the South African political landscape. I'm not always 100% sure about these polls that Ipsos put forward, but that's my own personal view. Now, let's take a look at what else you can look at on social media. Of course, the big talk here in South Africa is the death of former Secretary General of the ANC Youth League. It is a sad day in politics indeed. Sindiso Magaka died in hospital from gunshot wounds after becoming a target of political killings. The EFF spokesperson, Mbuyiseni Ndlozu, says, shame on you, death, that you unleash your wrath simply because those you kill hold a different political view. Shame on you. The hashtag is Sindiso Magaka, and this is a tweet from Mbuyiseni Ndlozu. This man is right in the crosshairs today. Orlando Pirates soccer player Happy Jele. Well, he's not so happy today as he was arrested for speeding, and I can tell you he is in a whole lot of trouble. Traveling at 223 kilometers per hour in a 120 kilometer zone. That is not the kind of example that we need to set to young people in South Africa, Happy. Moving further afield, Kenya's top court has set a date for the rerun of elections in that country. They will once again go to the polls on the 17th of October. The hashtag is Kenya. Of course, Raila Odinga said yesterday that they still have to decide on whether they will work with the electoral body in Kenya. Then the hashtag North Korea is doing the rounds all over the world. Yes, the nation has moved a guided ballistic missile known as an ICBM out of its factory, and it's moving it towards the west coast of that country. Now, this kind of missile can travel up to 5,500 kilometers, and it is designed for nuclear weapons delivery. It's believed that this test launch will take place on the 9th of September. That is just days away. Oh, tensions seem to be escalating. The world is very dangerous. Down south, Australia is hosting a nationwide postal vote on same-sex marriages. The challenge is being heard in the High Court in Melbourne today, with the ruling expected tomorrow there. Then the Duchess of Cambridge, Kate Middleton, or Princess Kate, is once again pregnant with her third child. The hashtag is Kate Middleton. Is that even news? Anyhow, picture of the day. Tumisole tells us who says the following. Hashtag Sindiso Magaka, rest in power, Keda Magaka. You'll be counted amongst those who fought for the truth. Let's go to our tweet of the day. It talks to something similar. That's our comment. It comes from Shati Mabuya, who says, what is going on? Nobody's getting arrested for killing people nowadays. Where is Operation Wanyacho? Yes, no arrests are being made. The Marana Commission is working, but people are dying. That's out there on social media. Anyhow, let's take a look at what's in the courts today here in South Africa. Orlando Pirates soccer player who soared Happy Jelly. Well, he'll be in court this morning for reckless and negligent driving. Jelly was traveling at 223 kilometers per hour in a 100-kilometer zone, we are told. Then the Constitutional Court will, of course, hear the Economic Freedom Fighters' application for direct access to impeach the president. We are discussing this matter shortly. Now, I can tell you that Professor Mia Swart from the University of Johannesburg is standing by to give us her considered views on this. Before we go there, let's just have a look at what you can see tomorrow. Now, tomorrow we focus on illegal or illicit trade in cigarettes here in South Africa, which defrauds the government of 6 billion rand per annum in unpaid taxes. Did you know that 15 million illegal cigarettes are smoked every day in this country? Shocking, isn't it? Anyhow, let's go over to Alvis to talk about today's Constitutional Court challenge.
Yes, Eben, it's all about impeach or not to impeach. That is the question. Now, the Constitutional Court will today hear the EFF's bid and 3 other opposition parties to force Parliament to take steps against the President Jacob Zuma for failing to uphold the Constitution. The EFF applied for direct access to the Constitutional Court on grounds that the Speaker of the National Assembly, Baleka Mbete, failed to take action against the President following the court's ruling that he violated his oath of office. Now, this is for failing to implement the Public Protector's remedial action that he paid back the money spent on non-security upgrades at his Nkandla home. Now, to talk to us about the legality of this case, we are joined in studio by Professor Mia Swart, a professor of international law at the University of Johannesburg, or UJ. A very good morning to you, Prof, and welcome.
Good morning, Elvis.
Now, we ask our viewers this morning, of course, what do they make of the EFF and, of course, the 3 opposition parties trying to impeach the president this morning? Your thoughts on it?
Well, fundamentally, this case is about constitutional supremacy. It's about the fact that the Constitution is the highest law, and that all natural persons, all human beings, all juristic persons, and even Parliament and even the President should be held to comply with the Constitution. And if not, there should be some accountability flowing from that. So I think that this case is about much more than merely about whether to impeach President Zuma. This is also about, making sure that the Constitution is respected and upheld, and that if that is not the case, and the Constitutional Court finds that that has not been the case, that there are consequences.
Can we say, Prof, that this case is about the separation of powers between the President and the National Assembly and the duty to hold the President accountable? Is that, in brief, what it means?
It is partly about separation of powers. I suspect that, the counsel for the Speaker for government is going to say that separation of powers means that, you know, the court cannot force Parliament to do this or that, right? So they are going to rely on the separation of powers as well. So I would say that that this is more about, accountability, the fact that no one is above the law, certainly not the president, and not even Parliament, and about constitutional supremacy, and about accountability and follow-up. So that if our highest court makes a ruling, as it did last year in March, in that Nkandla case, what we loosely call the Nkandla case, that there should be consequences. We should see accountability flowing from that, and that has not yet been the case.
Now, talking about accountability, the National Assembly Speaker, Baleka Mbete, she failed to take action, of course, after the Constitutional Court ruling that the President violated his oath of office. Does that then mean that the EFF and the opposition parties have a case here?
Absolutely. I think that they not only have a case, they have a very important case, and that this case has great symbolic importance. As we will see on the tweets coming in, the public is going to perceive this as mostly a question of will Zuma leave or be made to leave or go or not, right? But really, it's actually crucial that this case be brought, because we don't have any provision in our constitution dealing with the procedure of removing a president. And the court is basically going to have to also decide whether they are going to order Parliament to formulate a procedure to remove a president. Because we know that Section 89 in the Constitution provides for what is loosely called impeachment. The word impeachment isn't used. It's said, you know, the words are removal of the president under certain circumstances, which includes serious misconduct, serious violation of the Constitution, as well as incapacity to perform the functions of office. But there's no procedure. The Constitution doesn't tell us how that has to be done, and there is also no procedure currently in Parliament that tells us how to remove a president. So I think that this is a crucial issue that should Zuma be found to have, well, we already know that the Constitutional Court has on more than one occasion found him to have been in violation of the Constitution. That, according to the Constitution, should have consequences. There is, however, no procedure in place, plus the National Assembly has made no attempt to follow up on that crucial ruling last year, of March last year.
Now, the former public protector indicated that Parliament must ensure that the President must comply with the remedial action that was proposed. What disciplinary action, besides, of course, impeachment, can the President be subjected to by Parliament, or is that the only option?
Well, I think it's the only option that really matters, because he has, as I said, on various occasions violated the Constitution. For example, one case where the Constitutional Court found that the appointment of Similane, the former Director of National Prosecutions, you know, that the appointment of Similane was unconstitutional. That was another instance where he was found to have acted unconstitutionally. He lied to Parliament in the Nkandla case. There has been a succession of unconstitutional acts now. So in my view, the only really relevant and appropriate measure would be impeachment, yes.
Take us through then the steps, what would happen if the President is impeached. What happens next?
Okay, well, this is exactly the problem. The problem is that the Constitution itself and Parliament, in its rules and otherwise, you know, have not catered for a situation such as this. They have not catered for the practicalities. So there is, as yet, no clear procedure. We know that comparative jurisdictions, other jurisdictions such as the US, regulate these things, you know, in fine detail, but we don't have that. So possibly the drafters of the Constitution were too trusting and not to have regulated that in the Constitution. But certainly this is exactly what the order will partly be about, to say to Parliament that this should be formulated. And then if the vote takes place, you know, we heard from the Secretary General of the EFF earlier what the procedure would be. There would have to be a 2/3 majority in the National Assembly. It's very unlikely that that majority will, you know, be reached. But if there's a 2/3 majority, it means that effectively Zuma has been removed with the consent of Parliament, and then he would have to go. It's as simple as that.
Now, who will then officiate? Because you say there is no law that indicates what would happen next then, but who would then officiate in the interim if the President is tried or impeached?
As far as I understand, it would be the Deputy President for the interim period. It could be the Speaker. It would either be the Speaker or the Deputy President until there has been another election. Yes. Maybe I find this so unlikely that I am not 100% sure whether it would be the Speaker or the Deputy President, but there'd be an interim President before the next election, yes.
Will this be a precedent setting a case for South Africa, you think, today, after the Constitutional Court?
Yes, it would be important, and hopefully, at the very least, what will happen is that Parliament would have to formulate very clear procedures on impeachment, so that the Speaker, cannot in the future avoid calling an impeachment vote. Yes.
And to hold the President accountable, of course.
Absolutely.
Professor, I thank you so much for your time and joining us here in studio. That, of course, was Professor Mia Swart. She's a legal expert at the University of Johannesburg, also a professor of international law at the University of Johannesburg. Right now, let's go over to Yemen, because we're going to go back to court.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Jarvis. Of course, let's go back to the Constitutional Court now. Of course, the DA, they are admitted as an intervening party, I must tell you, in this matter before the Constitutional Court. And Aldrin St. Pierre is outside there. I understand that the DA's James Soff is with you, Aldrin. But before we start that interview, an intervening party, what is the role of that?
Well, these would be people who come and make submissions in addition to the main application that has been brought by the main applicant. And in this matter, the main applicant is the EFF, and as you've indicated, that the DA has also applied to be an intervening party, as well as COPE and the UDM. Actually, I just spotted the UDM's Bantu Olomisa has also arrived to be part of these proceedings and to watch these proceedings unfold. Right now joined by James Self. James, just quickly, let's speak about the DA's intervention in this particular matter, and just unpacking. You said that in addition to the contentions being raised by the various other political parties, there is another issue that the DA is contending, and in terms of the procedure of Parliament once an impeachment should be instituted.
Yes, well, we believe very strongly, and we're going to argue this in court, that it's one thing to bring an impeachment motion, but that is profoundly unfair, actually, to the President, because the President ought to have the opportunity to at least give evidence and give reasons why he should not be impeached. So what we're asking the court to do is to direct Parliament to either pass legislation or to enact rules that would allow there to be a proper procedure where the President is, or his legal representatives are questioned about the grounds for impeachment, and that Parliament then considers a properly thought through application for impeachment, instead of just relying on party discipline.
Because if you look here at Section 89 of the Constitution, it just says that the President can be removed via impeachment if there is a serious violation of the Constitution. But then the question is, how do you test whether there has been a serious violation of the Constitution?
That's entirely correct. I mean, this is not meant to be used for frivolous cases. And in the last time we brought such a motion, we had to rely on the judgment of the Constitutional Court in the Nkandla matter. But even then, there were a number of unanswered questions. Had the President lied to Parliament? Had the President relied on legal advice? If so, what legal advice? He made a number of averments in the case and during his address to the nation on the 1st of April last year. But we simply don't know whether that is factual. And the only way to establish whether it's factual is for there to be a procedure that allows Parliament to consider those matters in a deliberative way before taking a vote.
And because on the 1st of April, actually, the President did say he apologized, first of all, for the confusion, but he also spoke about how this matter has dragged on, and you believe that the President should answer to some of these questions about where did he get the legal advice from, what was that legal advice, and why did he follow that legal advice, even though you had the Western Cape High Court ruling. And the President said in that speech, when he delivered that speech on the 1st of April, that he did not deliberately breached the Constitution?
Well, I mean, he was the person who was dragging it out. He was the person who was getting involved in semantics. But the point of the matter is he relied on the Western Cape High Court. In point of fact, he had also, by the time he made that statement, the judgment of the Supreme Court of Appeal in the same case, where the Supreme Court of Appeal made it very clear that the public protector's remedial action was binding unless set aside on review, and that was 5 months before the Nkandla case. So he should there and then have settled the matter, paid back the money, and got on with the business. Instead, he dragged it out. But again, I think he was economical with the truth to Parliament. I think he was economical with the truth to the public. And all these sorts of things needed to have been established by a proper procedure.
And what's the next step from here?
Well, we hope that the court is going to direct the Parliament to bring some sort of impeachment proceedings, and we hope that the court will also direct Parliament to enact legislation or rules that will allow this to happen properly and in a way that establishes the rules long before the heat of the moment when we actually have an impeachment case on our hands.
Currently, the DA has tabled a motion for the dissolution of Parliament. Just to quickly unpack that for us.
Yes, well, last month we had a motion of no confidence. A number of people in the ANC defected and voted with the opposition. We suspect that if a vote was held today, a number of others would also do that. And it's quite clear that the government has lost the ability to rule effectively in South Africa. And rather than change governments or change presidents in midstream by means of an elective conference, let the people decide. Let the people decide what government they want. And what we are therefore doing is moving a motion in Parliament to call for fresh elections, which we're allowed to do in terms of the Constitution. And we hope that that would have the effect of allowing the people of South Africa to decide what government they want.
The EFF argues that the DA's motion is a bit premature, and they argue that the DA should have consulted the various other political parties. I don't know how true this is, whether the DA didn't consult the opposition parties, but the EFF saying that they will not support this motion.
Yes, well, that's unfortunate, and we're sorry that they're not doing that. But we believe that actually there are sufficient grounds for calling for fresh elections, and we hope that in the course of the debate this afternoon, those reasons will become very evident even to the EFF.
Well, thank you so much, James Selfer. Well, just quickly, James, before I let you go, as I've indicated earlier on, one of the topics that we're having is also the discussion around political killings. From the DA side, how do you think this issue can be resolved?
Well, it's a national scandal and it's a national something that we should all be very, very sorry about. We believe that actually sufficient force needs to be brought to bear on these areas of political killing so that the perpetrators are brought to book, that those perpetrators are prosecuted and sent to jail, so that there's a very clear message that is sent out that this sort of wanton destructiveness and this political assassinations has no place in our democracy. There are more than enough opportunities for South Africans to express themselves through the democratic procedures, and there's no place for political assassinations.
Have you been able to ascertain the genesis of these political killings?
They're very complex, in many cases and multi-layered, but one needs in the first instance to clamp down on the violence before one starts addressing the root causes of it.
Well, James Self, thank you so much. Well, there you have it from James Self. As we've indicated that in the next few minutes, the justices will come through to hear this application that has been brought by the EFF, and then we'll also hear the arguments from both the President as well as the Speaker of Parliament. And as James Self has indicated, that in addition to the application that has been brought by the EFF, what they're also seeking is that they seek that there be legislation that's incorporated into the rules of Parliament that when an impeachment comes, what the procedures should be in terms of the impeachment, in terms of inquiring, setting up an ad hoc committee and inquiring and looking into the conduct of the president to test the seriousness of the violation of the Constitution as per Section 89 of the Constitution. It's back to you in studio.
Thanks very much, Aldrin. Great job there outside the courthouse once again. As always, Aldrin once again in fine fettle. Even linked to the political killing story and got some reaction from the DA. Now, of course, we're running a poll on that story, and let's just have a look at what you guys are telling us with regards to the political killings. Now, to curb political killings, we need more arrests, convictions, or political intervention. 61% of you are thinking that more arrests and convictions should be the order of the day. Of course, the Marani Commission is busy doing its work and dealing with that. But let's go over to Elvis now to have a look at what's happening on some of our other platforms.
Let's take a look at what's happening on our Facebook page. Of course, Bell Pottinger. Remember them? The co-founder, Tim Bell, says that the whole board of the British firm should resign due to the work that was done here in South Africa. Of course, as you know, they were also booted out by the PR and Comms Association in Britain. Then the Rwandan police on Monday arrested Diane Shima Rwigara, a leading critic of President Paul Kagame, charging her with forgery and tax evasion. Her mother and sister were also arrested on the tax charges. And then finally, an unemployed woman from the East Rand here in Gauteng has won 25 million rand in the lotto jackpot. The mother of two spent 20 rand on her winning ticket, and she plans to buy a house for her family. The woman has been provided with financial assistance and advice to ensure that she spends her money wisely. Now, you can find all of these and more on our Facebook page and, of course, the SABC News website. Now let's take a look at what's happening on the front pages from the newspapers from around the globe. And we start off in the United Kingdom. The City AM reports that Bell Pottinger, one of the giants of the square miles public relations industry, was last night booted out of the sector's trade association following a probe into the controversial work it undertook here in South Africa. And the company's founder said that he believes this may be the end for the firm. Moving to New York, the New York Times in the Big Apple says that North Korea fired a ballistic missile over northern Japan this week, prompting the government in Tokyo to warn residents in its path to take cover and leading to another round of questions about whether war will soon strike the Korean peninsula. And finally, in China, the South China Morning Post reports that China will inject nearly $80 million into the operation of a bloc of emerging economies as it seeks to patch over differences and give the group a bigger say in global governance. Well, that's your newspapers from around the globe, but right now it's time to talk a little bit sport and see if Bafana can rise to the top. Let's go to Evan and Kendall.
Yeah, thank you, Elvis. I know how you guys are feeling, that Bafana find themselves in an all too familiar spot, and we have to go through all the most familiar sensations and feelings as fans, the die-hard ones. And of course, tonight they're in Durban, Kendall. They lost against Cape Verde, and that kind of changed the game a little bit, didn't it?
Absolutely, it did. Everybody expected us to come back with 6 points from this back-to-back clashes, but you know what? Another time, we're faced with another do or die, and then even after, we still have to wait for other teams' results. It's actually getting quite frustrating.
Now, the criticism towards the coach have been on team selection when we see social media. Do you agree with that?
No, I wouldn't. You know what? I think it's a team effort. Regardless of who you chooses, the entire team didn't show up. And regardless who would have chosen, the spirit was wrong, the mood was wrong. I think the players need to take responsibility for their own conduct on the field of play.
Yeah, let's hope Bafana put it together tonight. You know, that first goal they scored, I think that was the problem for me. You know, when they scored the first goal, I think the team just kind of rested on the laurels a little bit.
But you know what, at that level, you really should not be allowing that kind of thing to happen, and something needs to be done. A lot of people are talking about maybe psychologists and that kind of thing, but you cannot allow that to happen.
Yeah, mental toughness. We need to be tough away from home. Anyhow, let's come back and let's quickly talk about Rafael Nadal. It looks like he's on course to meet Roger Federer in the semi-finals for the first time in their illustrious careers at the US Open.
You know what, I think all the bookies, the pundits, the fans, everybody's looking forward to this clash. I mean, the US Open has never seen Federer and Nadal ever play, so this is going to be a fantastic matchup should they get to meet there.
Well, thanks, Kendall. Kendall and myself will be with you in the next hour. Of course, we'll be live at the Constitutional Court, but before we go there, we'll take the top stories at the top of the hour in a couple of minutes.
Today on Rights and Recourse, we will unpack the new Traditional Court Bill.
The idea of the bill is not to overregulate, to basically set the principles.
The most important aspect of this bill is that it understands that customary law, by its nature, is consensual. That I have a right to affiliate, I have a right, therefore, to opt in, and I have a right to opt out.
The opt-out provision is basically one that you've got to respect the court in the sense of, if you've been summoned, you've got to tell the clerk of the court at least that you're not willing to attend.
The challenge that I would like to throw to the Department of Justice, it has to come up with mechanisms of ensuring that people who exercise their right to opt out or to opt in are not in any way victimized.
Hashtag Rights with Dumila Matez on legal issues every Sunday at 2 o'clock Central African Time.
We're shooting a campaign. We're telling genuine stories from real people that have been affected by the SABC. It's also interesting to get the backstory in terms of their dreams to be on screen and eventually getting the pleasure to do that. And understanding that they're communicating on a platform that speaks to millions of people. It speaks to how the SABC can fulfill its mandate.
The SABC represents the opportunity for so many young South Africans, for old South Africans, to be able to look at the world that they may not experience any other way.
People should continue to pay their TV license because it allows the SABC to bring quality programming.
The TV license is really part of the lifeblood of the channel and the corporation.
When you're listening to your favorite jams, you're listening to your favorite radio DJ, you must know that you made it possible by paying your TV license.
It's such a holistic process that goes into TV licenses. It's not only one part where we say South Africans have to pay for TV licenses. You pay a TV license because you get so much value out of it, and that's the content that you get every single day on the SABC platforms.
I have been in the film industry now for 51 years. I am quite satisfied with the evolution of television now, that you have got a lot of actors and you have got a lot of crew members, which will also play part of paying our licenses, because I think it's proper.
Hello again, everybody. Yeah, very good morning to you once again. You're with us here on the Newsroom show. Of course, we'll be going to the Constitutional Court shortly for some fireworks there with impeachment stories going on. But of course, that's our question today.
Absolutely. You know what? We've been talking about this entire day and want to find out from you to bring into the conversation. The EFF has brought in a motion to try and impeach Jacob Zuma, the president. What do you make of this latest move by the EFF?
Well, here are some of the tweets. Some of the tweets.
And Sizwe Stotos comes in and says, our courts are reduced to dustbins for political battles. Operation Tarnish Zuma's name to gain regime change continues.
Yeah, very interesting. This one from Proudly Khoikhoi says, the EFF SA, they are lackeys of the white monopoly capital. This is just grandstanding. They're all just wasting their time. Zuma was elected by 62% South Africans, not the courts. Oh. Interesting views coming on. Let's go to the courthouse now. As you can see behind us, well, the full bench is ready to take in the latest application.
Due and payable to Trinity within 30 days from the date of delivery of Trinity's written demand. Trinity advanced the loan capital to Grindstone in 3 tranches during February 2008. Grindstone did not repay, On 9 December 2013, nearly 6 years later, Trinity served a letter of demand for repayment of the debt. Grindstone denied the debt. On 18 July 2014, Trinity launched an application in the Cape Town High Court to provisionally liquidate Grindstone. This was on the basis that Grindstone was unable to pay its debts. Grindstone raised a number of defenses. One was that the debt could no longer be recovered because it had not been reclaimed within 3 years. It had therefore prescribed. Grindstone contended that the debt prescribed in 2011, 3 years after the loan was advanced. Therefore, Trinity's steps to reclaim it in 2013 were more than 2 years too late. Trinity challenged the prescription defense. It contended that it was never the intention of the parties to the contract that the money advanced would become due and repayable immediately on being advanced. There had to be a demand first, before the debt would become due. Therefore, prescription started to run, or would start to run, only after that. The High Court rejected Trinity's argument. It upheld Grindstone's defense of prescription. It applied the principle in Badenhorst versus Northern Construction. This holds that where there is a genuine dispute about a debt, an application for liquidation of a company is inappropriate. The court granted Trinity leave to appeal to the Supreme Court of Appeal. The parties agreed that the only issue on appeal was whether the debt had prescribed. The SCA decided the matter by a majority of 3 judges against 2. The majority held that the debt was due the moment the money was lent. The 3-year prescription period therefore started running in 2008. Hence, the debt had prescribed. The majority of the court dismissed the appeal. The minority's view was that Grindstone failed to plead and prove when prescription started running. The minority reasoned further that the parties' loan agreement contemplated that a demand was an essential requirement for Trinity to reclaim the debt. Hence, prescription started running only when Trinity made demand for repayment. In this court, Trinity relied on the wording of the Prescription Act. This provides that prescription commences to run only when the debt is due. In this case, Trinity said, the wording of the parties' contract showed that they intended to delay when the debt became due. This would happen only once Trinity had demanded repayment. Grindstone, in the meanwhile, was provisionally liquidated in other proceedings. In this court, it indicated that it would not lodge written argument, but would abide the decision of the court. The court then requested the Johannesburg Bar Society to assist with appointing an advocate to appear on behalf of Grindstone. Ms. Nkosi Thomas, SC, of the Johannesburg Society, kindly filed written submissions in the best traditions of the legal profession. She supported the view that the appeal should be dismissed. This court had to consider whether the defense of prescription was properly before the court, whether the parties' contract showed that they intended to defer when the debt became due and thus delay the onset of prescription, and whether Trinity's debt had prescribed. I have prepared a judgment in which Justice Kampepe, Justice Madlanga, Justice Mhlantla, and Acting Judge Pretorius agree. This has become the majority judgment, as will now appear. This judgment finds that on a reading of the whole agreement, the parties did not intend to delay when the debt would become due. The language of the parties' contract did not mean that prescription began to run only when Trinity issued a demand. Further, the parties' language did not show any intention to delay. They simply meant to allow Grindstone 30 days to repay the debt once Trinity had issued demand, and not to postpone the due date of the debt to an indeterminate future date. The debt thus became due, and prescription began to run immediately when the loan was advanced in 2008. Grindstone's prescription defense, as the High Court and the majority of the Supreme Court held, was therefore valid, and the appeal is dismissed. Justice Fruneman has written a separate judgment in which he agrees with this judgment regarding the interpretation and the impact of prescription. he adds additional reasons for that conclusion. I myself, Justice Kampepe, Justice Madlanga, Justice Mhlantla, and Acting Justice Pretorius concur in these additional reasons. However, Judge Vreneman does not consider that the prescription issue is in fact properly before this court. He finds an antecedent issue arising from the High Court's application of the Badenhorst case, which he says needs to be dealt with before prescription. He sets out these reasons in his third judgment. The minority judgment, in which 5 judges concur, has been written by Acting Justice Mojapelo, Chief Justice Mogoeng, Acting Deputy Chief Justice Nkabinde, Justice Jafta, and Justice Zondo concur in Justice Mojapelo's judgment. The minority would hold that Trinity's claim has not prescribed. The minority finds that the parties' contract showed a clear and unequivocal intention to delay when the debt would become due. This made demand for payment by Trinity a condition precedent to claimability, and therefore, in the minority's view, Trinity's claim would not have prescribed. In the result, the court makes the following order. Leave to appeal is granted. 2, the appeal is dismissed. The applicant is to pay any taxed costs incurred by the respondent.
Well, we have to get out of that. It's the wrong case. These things happen in live television. Of course, all the broadcasters have been caught on the hop this morning. That's
Absolutely.
a Trillian judgment. You can see all the stakeholders, friends of the court, even Bancho Lamisa sitting there waiting for the impeachment proceedings to get underway.
But the leave to appeal has been granted, it seems.
It has been granted indeed, yes. But of course, today we're also focusing on some other scenarios, political killings sharp into focus. Of course, ANC Youth League Secretary General Sindiso Magaka, gunned down. He passed away last night.
Absolutely. So coming to their wounds. Now I want to find out from you, to curb these political killings, what do we need to do? We've given you 2 options. The first one, do you think we need more arrests and convictions, or do you reckon that political intervention is what's required?
Well, a big majority are saying more arrests and convictions. And I think the reason being there hasn't been any of these high-profile arrests and convictions that one would expect in these cases. Nearly 100 people are now killed.
And hardly any convictions at all, and it seems like it's getting rampant and it's getting out of hand.
Since 2014, I think the number stands at 93 or 94 people that have died for political reasons, not just in KwaZulu-Natal, but also elsewhere in the country. Dipanso tweets us and says to us, the ANC is at war with itself. How disgusting that nothing has been done to tackle these killings. Same moves as in they did in exile. Disgusting. Wow, tough words there.
Lechasa Batlamola saying politicians are fighting to enrich themselves, not to deliver services to the community. Like, for example, Ward 1 councillor is chewing our zaka, chowing our money.
Money, zak, that's what it is. Zaka, those who don't know is cash. Of course, we're also asking a sporting question today, and that's with Bafana Bafana. Are they going to redeem themselves? That's what all the supporters are hoping for, one would think.
And the entire nation is hoping that Bafana Bafana will do it this time and redeem themselves after a 2-1 loss to Cape Verde. Lechasa comes in and says, I really don't know what to say about Bafana Bafana. Can't make it. Can't even get himself to say something.
He said yesterday that Bafana don't exist for him anymore. And today he's suddenly changing his tune. Monday to Tuesday, Lechasa, we are watching you. The proud Koi Koi tells us, I'm 100% behind Bafana Bafana. Yes, they will redeem themselves. Yeah, positivity. That's what it is.
Yeah, but I'll tell you what, Lechasa's sentiments and what Lechasa is doing, I promise you, he represents half the entire nation. They flip-flop between exasperation and please, let's do it. I promise you.
More than half, I would tell you that. Anyhow, keep tweeting us and keep telling us what you think with regards to us. But let's take a look now at our top stories at this very hour. Now, the top story, of course, is that the Constitutional Court will hear the EFF's application seeking to force Parliament to hold the President accountable over the Nkandla saga. Later, Parliament will debate the DA's motion for the dissolution of Parliament and subsequent early elections. The ANC is concerned over the current political killings in KwaZulu-Natal following the death of Youth League leader Sindiso Magaka. Those are your top stories right now. Let's go over to Kendall for the sport.
Evan, thank you very much. Good morning to you. This is what we've got planned for you in the sports today. A resurgent Rafael Nadal dominates Alexander Dolgopolov in straight sets to advance to US Open quarterfinals for the first time since he won it back in 2013.
And Dolgopolov missing there. Rafa Nadal moves on.
Our players are certainly looking to take revenge on themselves rather than on their opponents.
Bafana have a shot at World Cup qualification redemption tonight when they face Cape Verde in Durban on the back of a 2-1 away defeat to the island nation last week. And African champions Cameroon will not be at the World Cup in Russia after losing 5-1 on aggregate to West African rivals Nigeria in the qualifiers.
The goal, Nigeria have found the back of the net.
All this in more detail we'll have for you should we still be online at about 10:40 or so. But do stay with Eben as he's got the news.
Yeah, we're toing and froing all over the place today. Now, the Constitutional Court is hearing an application by the EFF that seeks to force Parliament to have President Jacob Zuma held accountable over the Nkandla saga. Let's go there live.
Sufficiently deserving of direct access, and it should take into account that there is in fact no opposition to the question of direct access. In any event, there are clear factors that we have pleaded in our founding papers, and they are expanded upon in the heads of argument why this court should assume a jurisdiction on the basis of direct access. The one is the obvious fact of the public significance of the case. It does not happen often that there is a claim before this court for an investigation towards whether or not the president's conduct is impeachable. The second factor that should be taken into account is that this case, the substratum of the case, has already been decided by this court. It was, in fact, in the Nkandla judgment that this case first grappled with the underlying factual matrix of the case. And the case, in a sense, is an extension of the jurisdiction of this court from the Nkandla judgment. And the third point is the urgency of the matter. This court has already held in two judgments before us, first in the Mazibuko versus Sisulu case, as well as in the secret ballot case. It has already held that cases about the question of the propriety of the president's holding of office should be dealt with as a matter of extreme urgency. And the fourth factor is that the case does not engage disputes of fact. The case ultimately crystallizes to issues of law. The entire case put up by the EFF in the founding affidavit has not been disputed by the respondents. The entire factual matrix of the case has not been disputed by the respondents. So there is, in fact, no dispute of fact that should be resolved by the High Court in circumstances where the court might say, we want to hear what the views of the High Court are in relation to the assessment of the facts. And then the last point, of course, is that the question of direct access is no longer opposed by the respondents. So there can be no one complaining of prejudice that this court would sit as a court of first and last instance. Could I then move to the heart of the case? What are the questions before the case on the merits? There are two questions we submit with respect that the court should grapple with. The first relates to the question whether or not Parliament has failed in its obligation, first to scrutinize executive conduct, and upon that scrutiny, determine how to hold the executive accountable in terms of Section 42(3) and Section 55(2) of the Constitution. And the case here engages the head of the executive, the president himself. And as I will demonstrate in the course of my argument, it does not just engage the president in his official capacity as such. The case engages the president both in relation to his personal conduct and in relation to his official conduct. And we will see in the course of my address that what has happened is the collapsing of the two roles, and hence the issue of the conflict of interest arises. And then the second question is a question of remedy. If the court is with us that we are entitled to the declarators that we foreshadow in paragraphs 2 to 4 of our notice of motion, the question is whether it is appropriate that the court should then order the interdict that we seek in paragraphs 5 and 6 of our notice of motion. And the court will recall that the interdict we seek in those paragraphs is an interdict compelling the Speaker to put in place a mechanism, and we've suggested that the nature of that mechanism should be a multi-party subcommittee of Parliament. And we've also suggested what the terms of reference of that multi-party subcommittee of Parliament ought to be. It should consider whether or not the conduct of the President sufficiently shows that there is a prima facie violation of Section 89 of the Constitution, to the extent whether the Parliament must consider whether or not there are grounds for removal. In this court, in the previous case of secret ballot, this court has already used the term impeachment. So, in summary, what we are asking the court to do is to direct Parliament to consider whether or not the conduct of the President is prima facie impeachable. The second, so this second issue that I raise is disputed by the Speaker. The Speaker says it's inappropriate that the court should issue a mandatory interdict. Rather, what the court should do is to remit the matter to the Speaker to decide what to do with these facts. And I'll show to the court that that order is inappropriate in the light of what we know about the President's conduct and in the light of what, in our submission, is a proven inaction on the part of the Speaker. It is wholly inappropriate to remit the matter to the Speaker. It is, in fact, appropriate that the court should direct the Speaker to convene the multi-party committee. Now, why then do we say that there has been a failure by the National Assembly to scrutinize and hold the executive accountable? So we start there with the principles that have been decided in the jurisprudence of this court, which inform the debate as to the scrutinization as well as, or rather scrutiny, as well as the nature of executive accountability. 4 such principles are important for my address. They come from the Nkandla judgment as well as the UDM judgment, the UDM judgment being the secret ballot judgment. So the first principle is that the duty to hold the executive lies with the National Assembly or with Parliament. And it's important to set this out now because one of the arguments that are raised by the Speaker, certainly in the most recent heads of argument, is that it was upon the EFF and parties like the DA in Parliament to raise the proposal for the setting of a multi-party committee. But as the court will recognize from the UDM judgment in paragraph 10, as well as in the Nkandla judgment in paragraph 97, the primary responsibility to hold the executive accountable and to scrutinize executive conduct lies with the National Assembly. It is wholly inappropriate for the National Assembly to, in a sense, push that responsibility sideways and then ask for the opposition parties to assume the responsibility of holding the executive accountable. The duty lies with the National Assembly as a whole. And the Speaker is obviously the chairperson of the National Assembly. So the nature of the misconduct that we are complaining here is misconduct that happens right inside of Parliament. Because, as I will demonstrate, the second grounds of complaints are complaints related to whether or not President Zuma misled Parliament. Once the facts have been established, the prima facie facts have been established, that there is a prima facie case that he probably misled Parliament, there is a duty that has been triggered on the part of the National Assembly to initiate adequate processes to determine the facts in the first instance.
So the 10 minutes is up.
Thank you, Chief Justice. The second principle is that the mechanisms of holding the executive accountable must not only be effective, but they must also... Yes, sir, Justice.
I'll take you to a different point. You'll correct me if I'm wrong. I understand your client's case to be pegged on the existence of a prima facie case of the existence of impeachable offenses.
Yes.
And that here you rely on the Nkandla judgment, if I may call it that way, as well as the Nkandla report. Now, let us try to visualize a situation where we have nothing like that. A situation where, for example, some members of the National Assembly or even whatever other party or person may show an interest in the matter, takes the view that there is a prima facie case of impeachable offenses, but that is denied by the National Assembly, which obviously means that the National Assembly would then not do anything about it because they do not accept that there is such a prima facie case. Who then is to be the arbiter of the existence or otherwise of the prima facie case? Is it the court? If so, is that within, or should it be within the remit of the court to decide that, or to be the arbiter in such a case?
Yes. Justice Madlanga, there are two answers to the question. Firstly, the court should decide this case on its unique facts. And this is the point that I will deal with next. On the current facts, there is no dispute that there is a prima facie impeachable case against the president. We set that out in the founding affidavit. There is not a single line in the answering affidavit that denies it, both in relation to what the president knew when the Nkandla project was taking place, and also in relation to what the president told Parliament, his excuses that he made in Parliament. So if you confine yourselves to the current facts, it is quite clear that the existence of a prima facie case of impeachable conduct on the part of the president is not disputed. This case really is about what should happen in the light of the fact that there is an undisputable impeachable case against the president on a prima facie basis. So the starting point then, Justice Madlanga, to come back to your question, is that if the court confines its focus to the particular facts in this case, then the issue does not arise as to whether or not the judiciary strays into an area that is preserved for the legislature, or whether the judiciary operates outside. There is a principled question, and that arises not in the case brought by the EFF, but in the case brought by the DA. There is a principled argument that arises as to whether or not the current mechanisms in Parliament are sufficient to deal with instances such as this. But I would respectfully submit, Justice Madlanga, that what the court should be concerned with is the present case. It should decide whether or not, on the facts that we know, what we know about President Zuma, what we know Parliament has done in relation to President Zuma, and then decide whether or not what Parliament has done sufficiently meets the constitutional standard. So,
if I were to ask you to answer the case that is not here, your answer would be that the arbiter, where there is a dispute as to the existence of an impeachable offense, the arbiter would be Parliament itself.
Yes, we would submit that in certain circumstances, it's quite clear where Parliament says, well, we don't think that there is a prima facie impeachable offense. Then Parliament must be satisfied that there is a prima facie impeachable offense. And the other point, Justice Madlanga, in fact, I'm glad you've made a follow-up, because the other point is that what we propose doesn't take away from Parliament's responsibility to satisfy itself about the offenses, because what we propose, in a sense, is a precursor to the impeachment. What we propose is that there should be an inquiry into whether or not the conduct by President Zuma is itself prima facie impeachable. What we complain about is the inaction despite the Nkandla judgment, and it is the inaction despite the findings in this court in paragraphs 8 and 9 of the judgment by the National Assembly. We say that inaction simply violates the duties that are prescribed to Parliament by section 44.2 and 44.3 and 55.2.
Mr. Ngukantobi, the Speaker says because the DA had brought a motion in terms of section 89 of the Constitution, that is the end of the matter. Yes. Is that the correct statement? No, is there any obligation of the Speaker to do anything more than that?
Yes, it certainly cannot be the end of the matter to claim that because the DA brought a motion and the motion failed. Because if one looks at Section 89 contemplates, firstly, an establishment of the facts. And because Section 89 contains these two provisions, one is the President may be removed in circumstances where there is a serious violation of the Constitution, and the second is where he commits misconduct or he's unable to fulfill his functions. But let's just take the first part, which is the infringement of the Constitution, there is a qualification. The Constitution itself says the conduct must be serious. In other words, the violation must be a serious violation of the Constitution. So that contemplates a fact-finding inquiry. And even on the version that they put up, it's quite clear that there was no fact-finding inquiry on the part of the National Assembly when the DA launched its motion of no confidence. And the other answer, Justice Mhlantla, if one looks precisely at the terms of the motion by Mr. Maimane, the terms of the motion by Mr. Maimane were not about establishing the correct set of facts. The terms of the motion were that the president must be voted out on the basis of the judgment. What we are asking for here is that there should be an inquiry into the conduct of the president. So that's simply not an answer. It's a deflection, to be frank. So that simply doesn't answer. Then the second point about Section 89 is that if one looks at Section 89 also deals with misconduct. There is no way that one can ever establish whether misconduct has or has not happened by simply subjecting the entire matter to a vote. I mean, it just makes no sense at all. The only way to establish whether misconduct has taken place or not is a fact-finding inquiry. And the other point, which is why this defense by the Speaker simply should not avail them, they themselves accept that they have the mechanism of establishing the facts through a multi-party subcommittee of Parliament. And they give no explanation why they have not set up the multi-party process. What they say is that it's because you haven't asked for it. But that simply overlooks the duty that exists on Parliament in the light of the facts that we know in this particular case.
Nguko Toby, sorry.
Sorry, Justice.
When would that duty... When would that...
Oh, sorry.
Just the last part.
Yes.
In April 2016,
yes,
the EFF then sent a demand to the Speaker,
yes,
that there should be some inquiry, probably something in line to what you are seeking now.
Yes.
The response from the Speaker was that the President is not a member of the NA, cannot be subjected to these processes, and that you cannot get any external people. And furthermore, he has paid the money. What is your response to that?
Well, Justice Mhlantla, that answers the very complaint of the Speaker. We know from that letter that the EFF did in fact ask for a fact-finding inquiry. It obviously suggested that in order to ensure objectivity, the fact-finding inquiry should be chaired by a judge. The Speaker rejected the proposal outright. It is not as if she said, the idea of getting a judge is a bad idea, but I have a better idea of getting a multi-party process. So where matters stand at the moment, it's quite opportunistic for them to come to the Constitutional Court and say you haven't explored internal remedies, because they know that the EFF has asked for a fact-finding inquiry, which has been refused. And its refusal was not on the basis that it's because you have not asked for a parliamentary inquiry through which we could do a fact-finding process. Its refusal was a most formalistic refusal. And essentially what they said was, what you are asking for is not contemplated within the rules of the National Assembly. What they didn't do, which is what they should have done if they had a proper appreciation of their responsibilities, is to say, we understand the concern that you are raising. The way to deal with it is to set up a multi-party process. There is no such. And we now hear in the pleadings here that actually, no, we might be willing to do a multi-party process. But the fact of the matter is that this internal remedy has been explored and rejected by the Speaker. So, Justice Mogoeng, I don't want to shift to Justice Katrisa Tilwane without your permission. So, what? All right. Thank you.
Your mic is off.
As I understand your case, the EFF's case, Mr. Nguko Atobi, is that the National Assembly has an obligation under Section 42(3) and Section 55(2) of the Constitution to scrutinize and oversee and hold to account the national executive, and particularly the President. Now, can you, I'd like to understand the words oversee and scrutinize. Is there something more than the usual that must happen that the word scrutinize contemplates?
Yes.
Or that these two sections contemplate?
Yes, there is. Yes, the answer is yes. In paragraph 85 of the Nkandla judgment, what this court found, and that was in relation to what to do with the public protector report. What they said, and we know in that case that there was complete inaction. And what had happened, in fact, there had been all of those subcommittees, but those subcommittees were subsequently set aside by this court. But talking about scrutiny, this is what this court found. I think it was the Chief Justice who wrote the judgment for the court. And then he says, the National Assembly's attitude was that it was not required to act or facilitate compliance with the report, since the public protector cannot prescribe to it what to do and what not to do. And then later on in that passage, they say, those steps, it says, broadly speaking, it is correct. This is correct because scrutinize means subject to scrutiny. And scrutiny implies a careful and thorough examination or a penetrating or searching reflection. The public protector's report relates to executive action or conduct that had to be subjected to scrutiny. So understood. So if we take the first part of this court, what this means is a thorough examination, reflection, a searching reflection. I mean, no one can say on the facts of this case that there has been a thoroughgoing examination of the implications of the president's conduct. No one can say that.
Sorry, Mr. Ngugatobi. So then are you then contending that the question and answer process that was put in place was not sufficient to meet the requirement?
Yes, I am suggesting that there has not been a single process followed by Parliament in relation to scrutiny, which is a thoroughgoing examination of the facts. That has not happened at all, including, by the way, and this is the point Justice Mhlantla was pressing me on, including the proposal by Mr. Maimane. That simply did not meet the standard of scrutiny set by this court. The next question that you are asking...
Sorry, so that was the motion brought
yes.
to remove the president,
yes.
Which was brought at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and ended, I think, at 6 o'clock that afternoon.
Yes.
So what, there was debate
yes.
and a vote,
yes.
but you're saying there was no scrutiny in that process?
Precisely, because there was no thoroughgoing examination of the facts.
But it's not as if the political parties are denied the right to basically, or the entitlement to bring a motion to remove the president. Well, what you are saying, yes. all of the mechanisms are not in place to realize that right.
Precisely. I am suggesting that if one looks, I mean, what the EFF did ask for was scrutiny proper. It in fact suggested that the scrutiny must be done by a retired judge. That was refused by the Speaker. And that is why that simply is not open for them to come to court and say we haven't explored internal remedies. So to answer the first question, the answer that we propose as the EFF is that there has been no scrutiny of the president's conduct, despite the undisputed existence of a prima facie impeachable conduct on his part. The second point is that what you do with the outcomes of that scrutiny is then to exercise one's obligations of oversight. And this court has already stated in the secret ballot case that one of the mechanisms of exercising oversight is a motion of no confidence under Section 102, as well as impeachment under Section 89. It is impossible for the Speaker or anyone in Parliament to exercise their obligations of holding the executive accountable, including by resorting to removal under Section 89, unless they have done the scrutiny that we've come to ask this court to compel them to do. Thank you. Chief Justice, may I...
Well,
oh, yes, there is a Deputy Chief
Mr. Ngugatobi.
Yes.
The Speaker says last year, if I recall correctly, or for a certain period, there was a process within the National Assembly in which all the political parties took part to amend or revise the rules of the National Assembly. And she says that, as I understand her case, any of the political parties was free during that process to make suggestions that could cover whatever the applicants in this case may have wanted to see in the rules in relation to Section 89 processes. And she says none of the parties, none of the applicants made any such suggestions. And she says, well, the parties agreed at a certain stage to leave the process uncompleted. I assume on the basis that they would come back and finalize whatever they had not finalized. Now, I am not aware that the applicants deny that, and it may well be that maybe they didn't get a chance to respond to that.
Deputy Chief Justice, there is probably one. The case of the EFF does not suggest that they must introduce a new set of rules. The case of the EFF is that they must utilize the existing mechanisms. They have not utilized the existing mechanisms, despite having the authority. If one looks at the latest affidavit filed by the Speaker yesterday, the Speaker herself says that she has adequate mechanisms. What she is unable to answer is why is she not using those mechanisms in the light of what we know today?
So with that answer, am I right to say, therefore, you and the Speaker, that is the EFF and the Speaker, might be very close in the sense that you are saying within the existing rules,
yes,
what you want can be done.
Yes, precisely.
And the Speaker doesn't say, at least, let's leave some time back, doesn't say now she is refusing existing rules utilized. Actually, if I recall correctly, she said in her answering affidavit something to the effect that what the applicants want, they can get through the existing rules of the National Assembly. That's my recollection.
Yes, yes, Deputy Chief Justice, what we firstly, on the question of the rules, there is one case that's taking place that's brought by the DA in relation to the adequacy of the mechanisms. We don't oppose that case. What we say is that it's not necessary for the court to reach a conclusion on that issue. The relief of the EFF is a narrow relief. It is on the mechanism. One, we are entitled to a declaratory order that since this court delivered its judgment in March 2017,
that the request had elements or fissures that fell out.
well, I would submit, Deputy Chief Justice, that if the Speaker had been acting properly, of the President's conduct, the Speaker wanted
A top 5 rated horse racing event in the world, fashion is a highlight for those in attendance. All decked out in blue and white, the Lomorians Queen Plate is the premier event that kicked off everyone's social calendar.
That it was all part of my master plan to cast John Legend, but deprive him of his normal instrument and give that one to Ryan.
The House of Truth is not just a name. It is a religion. It is a lifestyle. It is a conviction that drives us.
What really excites me is how people have kept it very simple and also played with the theme, and how each person has interpreted it in their own way.
To stay updated with all the current entertainment news, tune into Trends every Saturday from 12 to 1.
Of impeachable conduct on the part of the president, I would have assumed that in court we have to assume that to be the case and leave it to the National Assembly to deal with that. In other words, shouldn't we assume that that is the case because of the fact that allegations have been made in the affidavits, and we know what was said in what you call the Nkandla judgment. So the rest should be for the National Assembly to decide whether that case is sufficient or not.
Yes, Deputy Chief Justice, that's true. It depends on where we stand in relation to the proposals that I make. Firstly, let me answer the question about the existence of a prima facie case. I accept what you're proposing to me, that the court must assume that there is a prima facie impeachable offense against the president. And the court does not, in fact, even have to assume this, because it's overwhelming on this record. It's in the founding affidavit. It's not denied in the answering affidavit. Even if you apply Plascon Evans, it's quite clear that there is a prima facie impeachable offense. What is most disconcerting here is that the prima facie impeachable offense extends to his own representations in Parliament. President Zuma has told Parliament several times, one, I have a bond. The public protector says, I've looked into this issue of the bond. I can't make sense of it, whether or not it covers the building in Nkandla or it doesn't cover the building in Nkandla. That on its own establishes a necessity to inquire. When the president was asked by the public protector about this bond, what his response was that I want Parliament to inquire into this issue of the bond, not you as the public protector. Second point that we know is that there was a building in his house from 2009 to 2013. What he said in relation to that building, the public protector found that he knew that public funds were being expended to build him a house. And he knew that the expenditure extended beyond the so-called security features. The court found...
Well, I can only say this, Mr. Ngugaitobi. You don't have to persuade me.
Thank you.
That,
Thank you. Thank you, Deputy
that there may be a case to be dealt with by the National Assembly.
Yes.
But let's go back to the question I asked earlier on. I said, as I understand it, the request you made to the Speaker had features that fell outside the rules, about judges and so on, isn't it?
Yes, Deputy Chief Justice, I mean, I would contest that slightly. I mean, I won't put up a vigorous defense.
Yes.
There is nothing that prohibits the Speaker from appointing a sitting judge, especially on a matter as important as this. So it's not even head defense. Head defense was not that this is in conflict with the rules. Head defense was that we don't have a process similar to the one you are proposing. But that's a different proposition from saying that it conflicts with the rules. In other words, appointing a judge to inquire into the president's conduct on the prima facie case would itself be unconstitutional. We would, in fact, even suggest that it might even be a preferable route to undertake, that you have to take someone who is not only independent, but is also perceived to be independent. And what better person could have been if it had not been a sitting, a retired judge? So I would contest to some extent the proposition that what we asked for was unconstitutional. What I would accept is that on the rules, what she could do is to appoint a multi-party committee, but that is not the same as saying she was prohibited from appointing a judge.
Well, you see, my concern is that the EFF didn't, as I understand the papers, didn't go back to her and say, Look, all we are asking you, or we will be content with, a process that's in the rules. We are asking you to do nothing more than what's in the rules. I know that you just said maybe 10 minutes ago that when she responded to the EFF's request, she didn't say, I'm not happy with this process, this proposal, but I would be happy to provide you with a multi-party committee and process, in which case, as I understand your case, the EFF would have been happy.
Yes. Well, what we're asking for now in paragraphs 5 and 6 is simply that there has to be an investigation. If that investigation takes place, we've actually proposed a multi-party investigation. In our heads of argument, we even expand on the features of that multi-party investigation. And we even say, in relation to the features of that multi-party investigation, the Speaker, in fact, does not refuse any of the proposals that we make.
I think if I read the answering affidavits and the acting Speaker's affidavit and the written submissions, I think there is no problem with that as far as the Speaker is concerned. But as I understood what she was, part of what she was saying was, you people are part of the National Assembly.
Yes.
You people you are part of committees of the National Assembly. You can utilize these processes to achieve what you want.
Yes.
And my concern is on that basis, but also even if that's not the case, if actually there is, in terms of the rules, a process which could have been insisted upon, which could have given you what you want, would it be in the interests of justice to entertain the matter?
Deputy Chief Justice, there is something deeply disturbing about that attitude which is evinced by the Speaker. And it's disturbing at two levels. One is at the level of principle. The obligation to hold the executive accountable is the obligation imposed on the National Assembly. The representative of the National Assembly is the Speaker. So this idea that what they seek to do is to deflect, so that they say actually the obligation is that of the opposition parties, is constitutionally deeply concerning, because it is the same attitude that characterized the Speaker's conduct in relation to the Public Protector report. It is the same attitude that characterized her conduct in relation to the secret ballot judgment. And it is the same conduct that we see today, both in Nkandla and in the secret ballot. This court was at pains to explain that the primary obligation for executive accountability is in the shoulders of the National Assembly. You are the representative of the National Assembly. The court must repeat the same message for the third time to the Speaker. So it's constitutionally disturbing that the Speaker keeps deflecting attention in relation to her responsibility of holding the executive accountable, notwithstanding the two judgments of this court, which are expansive with references to where the primary responsibility of executive accountability lies. So that's the first problem that is concerning about this attitude taken by the Speaker, that essentially assigns the responsibility sideways and then avoids responsibility at the end of the day. The second problem why this is deeply concerning is a factual one. The DA has already made a proposal that President Zuma must be removed under Section 89. The EFF has also already made a proposal that the President's conduct must be subjected to scrutiny. On neither of those occasions has the Speaker actually done what this court has repeatedly told it to do, which is to take responsibility and initiative in circumstances such as this. So I suggest to you, with respect, Deputy Chief Justice, that this is again another manifestation of this kind of constitutional negligence that characterizes the Speaker's conduct. And it is the third time we are coming with the same issue before the court. And again, it is the third time where the Speaker again misunderstands that the responsibility of holding the executive, the party that she belongs to, accountable, is on her shoulders. So we would respectfully submit that if one is to be consistent jurisprudentially in relation to what the court has found, it's quite clear that as soon as there was prima facie a case of misconduct, and I don't want to persuade you again, Deputy Chief Justice, I know you are persuaded in the point, as soon as there was that evidence, that duty was triggered. The Corruption Watch makes another powerful submission that what the Speaker also overlooks is the duty to confront corruption. And that duty is imposed by Section 7.2 of the Constitution. What this case is about is that you have the head of state taking public funds for personal use. What does the Speaker think should happen?
Mr. Toby, could I just raise two issues with you, please? Accountability is clearly a constitutional value, and it could take various forms. You could have a soft form of accountability, and you could have a more stringent form of accountability. As I understand your argument, one could have a constitutionally mandated form of accountability that is required to be initiated and led by the institution. Yes. On the other hand, you could have a form of accountability that is largely discretionary and incidental. Yes. That may be in the hands of political parties, yes, who may determine whether to put a question or not. Yes. Why are you saying that this case warrants a more stringent form of accountability if that is indeed what you're saying?
Yes. It is indeed, Justice Colopin, what I say. And in fact, in this regard, I am, I would respectfully submit, supported by the findings of the Chief Justice in the UDM case. In paragraph 10, he explains, the Chief Justice, it thus falls on Parliament to oversee the performance of the President and the rest of the Cabinet and hold them accountable for the use of state power and the resources entrusted to them. And sight must never be lost that all constitutional obligations must be performed diligently and without delay. When all the regular checks and balances seem to be ineffective or a serious accountability breach is thought to have occurred, then the citizens' best interests could at times demand a resort to the ultimate accountability mechanisms. Those measures range from being voted out of office by Parliament through a motion of confidence or impeachment. These are crucial accountability-enhancing mechanisms that forever remind the President and Cabinet of the worst repercussions that could be visited upon them for a perceived or actual mismanagement of the people's best interests. So what I say, guided by that passage, Justice Colopin, is that if one looks at what actually has happened here, this is probably one of the most egregious forms of breach of executive power. And it is not enough to say, I'm expecting the EFF to raise a question and answer, or I'm expecting the DA to make a proposal. What this case requires is, in fact, the kind of ultimate accountability ensuring mechanisms that the Chief Justice spoke about.
And just finally, as I understand it, is the decision to establish a multi-party committee not that of the National Assembly rather than that of the Speaker?
Yes. Well,
and if that is indeed the case, then would this court not be treading close to violating the separation principle, yes, by directing that such a committee be established when in fact the mandate of the National Assembly is precisely to consider the establishment of such a committee?
There are two answers to that, Justice Colopin. The first is that in cases where there is in fact no dispute between us and the Speaker about the propriety of that process, there is no necessity to fear trenching upon separation of powers. Such as in this particular case, Justice Zondo reminded me of a passage from their answering affidavit, which makes it clear that they have no difficulty with it. So there should be no necessity to be concerned by the court on that score. The second part is that whatever the views of the court might be on paragraphs 5 and 6 of our notice of motion, paragraphs 2 to 4 entirely should be granted, because that is the declaratory order that we seek, simply explaining what the law is. So that part of the declaratory order typically falls within the mandate of this court. The interdict part of the order, of course, always trenches upon separation of powers, but the overriding factor here is that this is not, in fact, considered to be inappropriate, even by the Speaker herself. What she wants is a most formalistic order that you must tell the EFF and the DA to go back to Parliament and to raise this. But to what end, given what has transpired so far?
I'm sorry. Yes. Help me understand this. As I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, as I understand it, each member of parliament individually has a right to initiate the process in terms of Section 89.
In terms of Section?
89.
Oh, yes.
And if the motion of no confidence or the motion of removing the president by the DA had succeeded, that would have constituted holding the president to account, would it?
Yes, indeed.
Now, help me then understand, how do we get to a point where we say for the process to be attributed to Parliament, it must be initiated by the Speaker and not by any member of Parliament?
Yes. Well, Justice Drafter, we've got to, firstly, the process that we have in mind, which is the process, a precursor to Section 89, the investigative process. I mean, this court has already found, not in a directly applicable case, but in Nkandla, as well as in the secret ballot case, that the obligation of holding the executive accountable resides with the National Assembly, and the Speaker is the chairperson of the National Assembly. And so she must initiate the process.
But we know that the National Assembly can only act through its members.
Yes, that we accept, Justice Drafter, but what we say in this case is that if one looks at the fact that the request has already been made and that request was rejected at the instance of the Speaker, and then if one looks at the nature of the process that we have in mind, that process has already been proposed and refused. The third point, of course, being that what we propose is not disputed by the Speaker.
Help me understand, perhaps I've missed on the facts, the timing relating to the motion by the DA and the request by your client. What is the sequence there?
I must just check the facts. Yes. The letter by the EFF is dated the 5th of April 2016. It is at page 162 to 163. And the request by the DA, I think that's also the same day. I just want to check this. Yes, I'm told that it was also the same day, the 5th of April 2016. In fact, according to the papers, the debate was on the 5th, and the request by the EFF was also on the 5th. So that you will see from pages 32, 33, 34, 35 of the record.
Which came first? I'm still with you, but which one came first?
The request, it must have been the, oh yes. The request by the DA, I'm indebted to my learned friend, is at LT 7, 31 March 2016. The DA made the proposal, and then the EFF on the 5th of April made the proposal. That motion by the DA, although it was made on the 31st, it was debated on the 5th. So that's on the 5th of April 2016. So the sequence is the DA went first and the EFF came after.
Wait a minute. I'm sorry, my brother. The DA's motion was debated first.
No, it was delivered on the 31st. It was then debated on the 5th.
Right.
Yes.
And the process was finalized around some time after, is it 19 minutes after 6 or something?
Yes. It's after 6.
Right.
Between 4 and 6.
When then did the EFF act?
The EFF sent the letter.
In relation to that time?
Yeah, it sent the letter earlier. The problem, it doesn't say what time the letter of the EFF was sent, but it sent it prior to the debate taking place, prior to the 2 o'clock debate, at least finishing at 6.
It would have helped to know the time.
Yes. Well, I will check whether there is a record of the actual email or the record of the actual, because the letter itself doesn't have any. It's at page 162 to 163. It doesn't say what time it was sent, but I can check that, Chief Justice.
Over to you, my brother.
And we know the response came on the 12th of May 2016 by the Speaker refusing the request by the EFF.
Thank you, Chief Justice. See, my difficulty, Mr. Ngogaitari, is at what stage would we, in terms of the law, attribute the process initiated by the DA to the National Assembly as a process of the National Assembly? I would assume, had that motion succeeded, the President would have been removed from office by the National Assembly.
Yes. Well, what we have said about that process are two things, and I would like the DA to speak on that topic. But what we've said in our papers are two things about it. The first, insofar as it was based on Section 89, on a proper construction of Section 89, Section 89 envisages a two-stage process. The first is a fact-finding process, precisely because there has to be a determination of seriousness, and there has to be a determination of misconduct. So insofar as it was brought prior to that process, what we have suggested is that it was premature. The second thing we have said about that motion is that it does not replace the process that we are envisaging. In fact, the process that we are envisaging is the process that is constitutionally demanded if the executive has, if the Parliament has to play its role of scrutiny prior to holding accountable. So I would submit with respect, Justice Schafter, whether you do attribute that process to the National Assembly or you don't, actually does not answer the case of the EFF before this court, because the case of the EFF before this court is that there has been a failure of the duty to scrutinize, and there's therefore been a failure of the duty to hold to account.
Would that two-stage approach apply even in situations where there has been judicial findings by the court? For example, that the President has breached the Constitution. Wouldn't that by itself be a serious breach?
So, Justice Schafter, we've explored this topic in some detail. Let me just debate it a little bit before answering the question. You see that there are two ways in which the President could breach the Constitution.
Well, maybe you would want to answer, and then he can decide whether he needs clarification. I think it would help our time. Your time is already up, by the way.
Yes. Thank you,
it would help a lot just to answer, and if there is some uncertainty, he will seek clarification.
All right. Thank you, Chief Justice. So, Justice Schafter, so what I submit about this topic, about the two-stage process, whether it would apply in all circumstances, is that it will not apply in all circumstances. But what we would submit is that on the current case, the two-stage process applies. There will be cases where the court has made a clear determinative finding, but it depends on the nature of that finding. If the finding goes to the person of the President as opposed to the office of the President, in those circumstances, we would submit that perhaps the two-stage process could be obviated. But in this case, because there is so much that we don't actually know, and because all we know are tendentious indications of misconduct, then the two-stage process is warranted. So that's the answer, Chief Justice. The debate is in my heads of argument.
Finally, Mr. Ngcukaitobi, can I just clarify that you're not saying the National Assembly has failed to fulfill its obligation to ensure that the President complied with the remedial action of the Public Protector. You seeking or you are advancing a failure to discharge fulfillment of a different obligation.
Yes, indeed, okay. Justice Swift.
I've just got one question for you, Mr. Ngcukaitobi, and the question arises from the structure of Section 89. Now, the theme of the argument has been that there has a prima facie case of impeachable conduct has been established.
Yes.
But if one has regard, if one reads Section 89, it refers to a serious violation of the Constitution, serious misconduct. Now, the prima facie case that you said has been established, is it a case that establishes serious violation or a violation of the Constitution, or is it a case that establishes misconduct or serious misconduct?
Yes, I would submit.
Who must decide on the seriousness of a misconduct? And secondly, who must decide on the serious violation of the Constitution? Because it will seem to me that it's not all violation will give rise to an impeachable conduct. The violation must be serious. Or
yes.
Can you help me there, just to clarify?
Yes. So the answer to the first question, which is which of the grounds, we're relying on A and B. We're saying that there is a serious violation of the Constitution, and we've set out what the provisions that we say have been violated. The central provision is Section 89. The President put himself in a position where there was a risk of conflict between his personal interest and his official responsibility. What makes it serious on a prima facie basis, we say it's because he knew that public funds were being utilized for his benefit. And notwithstanding that knowledge, he allowed the public funds to be used for his personal benefit. Both of those established the prima facie seriousness. The second part, which is serious misconduct, we say it's misconduct falling outside the constitutional framework, but it's misconduct of I think it's called the Members' Ethics Act by the Public Protector. And that involves the question of what he told Parliament. If he misled Parliament, which is the finding that the Public Protector could not find, that would constitute serious misconduct, because it's sometimes a criminal offense to mislead Parliament. And the second question is who decides. Sorry, Justice.
Another proposition which you made, you said that there was nothing that prevented the Speaker from appointing a judge to conduct an inquiry.
Yes.
I'm a little bit worried because that seems to be outside the scheme that is envisaged by Section 89, because it will seem to me that the power to remove the President resides in the National Assembly. And now the body that you were suggesting is the body that falls outside what is envisaged by Section 89.
Yes. Justice Sonde, I accept the broad principle. Let me just confine myself to this particular case, because my central theme has been that it's all context specific. What we were proposed here on the 5th of April was that there must be a fact-finding process. The question of finding the facts could be done by a judge. That obviously does not mean that the National Assembly should not decide on its own independently whether or not there is a case that is of an impeachable conduct on the part of the President. So the proposal that Mr. Shivambu sent was do a fact-finding inquiry. After the fact-finding inquiry, take your report to the National Assembly. That process is in fact no different to the process envisaged now by the Speaker, which is the fact-finding process must be done by a subcommittee of Parliament, because there is still going to be a second stage where the National Assembly as a whole will decide what to do with the findings. So the reason I submit that it's not unconstitutional to ask a judge to find out what the true facts are, because, of course, judges are trained in forensics. And thereafter, for the National Assembly to say, on the basis of the facts that have been established by the judge, we want to decide whether to exercise our Section 89 obligations. So, but there's a question I haven't answered, Justice, which is who decides. So, in relation to who decides whether Section 89 has been violated, it's the National Assembly. The scheme that we are proposing doesn't take away that power. In fact, it reaffirms the power.
Nguka Toby, as I understand your case, you were suggesting, well, I mean, you're saying the EFF did make a request to the Speaker to put in place this mechanism.
Yes.
But as I also understand your case, you are saying that there was a duty on her
yes.
to set this up without even a request being made.
Precisely. Yes.
Because she's supposed to be, I mean, she certainly has party political affiliation. She's there by virtue of the majority party. But at the end of the day, she has certain duties, and she must carry out those duties impartially.
Precisely.
Am I right?
Yes.
So
right.
Even without a request, and the EFF request is somewhat clouded in this judicial commission being set up and the Speaker not having that power.
Yes.
But nothing stopped the Speaker from setting this up on her own.
Yes.
Even after, well, I mean, as I understand it, you say that the duty was triggered immediately after the Nkandla judgment.
Yes.
Am I right? The Speaker had set up 2 ad hoc committees to look into the findings of the public protector.
Yes.
And basically use that to absolve the president. Yes. So nothing stopped her, subsequent to the Nkandla judgment, to actually put together this ad hoc committee. And as I understand your case, you're happy for an ad hoc committee, and it need not be a judicial commission of inquiry.
No, precisely, Justice Catherine Setulane. We accept that, in fact, that's what we propose in paragraph 5 and 6 of our notice of motion. And the first proposition is also correct, which is that this was an independent duty that flows from Section 44.3 and Section 55.2. It's been affirmed twice by this court. And it's not clear why the Speaker says she had no such duty. She had to wait for the EFF.
Sorry, would that duty to set up this fact-finding committee be re-triggered after the DA lost the motion?
Yes, it was a permanent duty. It remained for as long as there had been no scrutiny over the President's conduct. It was never discharged just because the majority ran through a proposal. It was simply never discharged because there was a duty of conducting a thoroughgoing search or a proper reflection on the President's conduct. So that duty remained permanent. It still has not been fulfilled even today. Even the Speaker doesn't say that that duty has been discharged at all. I mean, she refers to a number of other irrelevant processes that have taken place, but never a process designed to achieve the goal that we say is the constitutional obligation.
But as I understand the Speaker's supplementary heads of argument, and we'll hear from Mr. Mainechi about that, they don't actually see the need for a trial-like procedure to be put in place. How does the EFF see this? What is the role of this committee? How does it perform its functions?
Yes.
You know, is there cross-examination? Is there evidence-led? Does the President get represented at these proceedings? How do you understand it?
Yes, what we have proposed in our heads of argument is there are certain basic features of this committee. The one is that its job is to conduct a fact-finding inquiry. The second is to allow the President an opportunity to explain himself. And then the third, most importantly, is cross-examination. We are not fixated about whether one calls this a trial-like process or doesn't, because it is ultimately overseen through a political branch of government. They themselves say, we have powers of subpoena. We can subpoena documents, we can subpoena evidence. And we've set out the features of this committee. And the essential features are natural justice and the duty to cross-examine and a proper fact-finding inquiry. If those features are set out in the judgment of this court, that would satisfy the constitutional obligation, because we are not saying the President must be taken to court. The President must account where he should be accounting, in Parliament. The problem today is that the Speaker has simply allowed the President to go scot-free without accounting for what is clearly on anybody's version a prima facie impeachable offense. So I want to just check where we say paragraph 9.0 of our heads of argument. That is, those are the features we recommend, which even in the supplementary heads of the Speaker, yes, paragraph 89, that's where it starts, the features of the inquiry. Multi-party committee, a mandate is to determine whether the President is guilty of serious misconduct or serious violation, conducted in public, consider relevant documents, and meaningful questioning of witnesses. And it doesn't have to be cross-examination, but witnesses can be questioned. And the President must be allowed an opportunity to come. If he decides not to take the opportunity, but at least he should be allowed to come. And then, once it has completed its process, it must send a report to the National Assembly for further deliberation.
So just on the point about a trial-like process, if one reads Section 89 purposively, that it obviously it contemplates the two-stage process, yes. But the process of the fact-finding inquiry would be trial-like.
Yes, I mean, one could say it would be trial-like, but as long as it is a meaningful inquiry, yes. But as I say, it is not essential for our case that it must be branded like a trial. What is essential is that it must serve the purpose of ensuring that the facts are known. Because as Mr. Badlander reminded me yesterday, in this case, there's something that we know, but there's a lot we don't know. Chief Justice, I must answer the question about the time. Someone has sent me this. I don't know who it is, and I can't vouch for its authenticity.
No. Give us things that you can vouch for.
Yeah. So I'm told that it's 6:41 p.m. on the 5th of April 2016, and there is a screenshot available. That's the note I've been given, but I'm not taking responsibility for it.
You'll send us an affidavit taking responsibility.
I'll ask my attorney, Chief Justice, to send an affidavit.
Okay, I just want to check if my colleagues have questions. Well, I have questions.
Yes.
Let's look at Section 89, subsection 1. A. The National Assembly by a resolution...
Which subsection, Chief Justice?
1A.
1A, yes.
A National Assembly by a resolution adopted with a supporting vote of at least 2/3 of its members may remove the President from office only on the grounds of A, serious violation of the Constitution or the law. Maybe B also applies serious misconduct. Now, when the Constitutional Court says the President has failed to uphold, defend, and respect the Constitution as the supreme law of the land, what should be made of that?
Well,
does it say that he has violated the Constitution in a serious way, or does it not say that?
Chief Justice, we would say on these facts, it says that he has violated the Constitution in a serious way.
So what is there to investigate?
Well, Chief Justice, there is a question that remains as to what are the circumstances, whether or not those circumstances...
No. I'm sorry, I'm going to be interrupting you, but yes. You know how we engage.
Yes.
And I mean not to embarrass, but just to satisfy myself that we do the right thing.
Yes.
That's what it is about. What do you investigate? Are you going to investigate whether that conclusion by the Constitutional Court constitutes a serious violation or a minor violation? What is it to investigate?
Yes.
What is there to investigate, rather?
Yes. Chief Justice, what I would submit with respect on this topic, so there could be a finding by the court that says the President has failed to uphold and defend the Constitution. And that may refer, for instance, to the presidential executive functions.
No, within the context of this case,
yes,
and bearing in mind the history, the particular history of this case, we know the public protector investigated. We know the court pronounced itself in the manner I've just alluded to.
Yes.
What are you going to investigate?
Well, Chief Justice, we would submit that there is still a necessity for an inquiry in order to allow the President an opportunity to explain himself. At this point in time, For Parliament, sorry, Chief Justice.
No. Wrap it up. Wrap it up.
Yeah.
But my curiosity is overflowing,
Yes,
so you'll bear with me.
No, I accept that. But I would say, Chief Justice, that at this point, who knows, the President might have, and I'm not speaking on behalf of the President, but the President might have an exculpation. But
that's for him to say.
Yes.
You don't have to be imagining possible exculpations.
Yes.
You look at the history, you look at the findings and the remedial action of the public protector, you look at the Constitutional Court judgment.
Yes.
What do you want to investigate?
Yes. Chief Justice,
on that score, confining ourselves to that. Put aside whether he told the truth about this or the other thing, whether he knew, whether he should have stopped, just on that.
Yes.
What do you want to investigate?
Well, Chief Justice, I would still submit that it's still essential, firstly, to allow him an opportunity. The second...
So you are worried about his interests?
Yes, well
instead of allowing him to be worried about his own interests?
No, Chief Justice, it's, the difficulty, of course, is that the judgments cut across, future presidents as well. But I would be worried in endorsing an approach that would simply cut out the possibility of some form of Audi on his part.
Is that the reason? So what is it about this finding that you want him to possibly come up with an exculpatory explanation about?
Well, Chief Justice, there is an old judgment of the House of Lords, that sometimes a case may look open and shut, but when subjected to a hearing, an explanation emerges.
No. Here is a significant portion of the National Assembly in the form of the Economic Freedom Fighters, the Democratic Alliance, Congress of the People, and the United Democratic Movement.
Yes.
They have the benefit of the Public Protector's report and the benefit of a pronouncement by this court. So, what is there about all this to give them reason to say, no, we must investigate?
Yes.
We must investigate. We hear the court, but we must still investigate. What is it?
Yes. Well, what we've said, Chief Justice, is that there are two
What
things.
uncertainty do you want to clarify?
Yes. Well, we've said there are two things in our heads of argument, in our papers. We've said there are two things that justify this preliminary inquiry. The first is a determination of the seriousness, and I take...
So you mean this may not be serious?
Well, Chief Justice, it depends on what he knew at the time and what he says it
No. Confine it to the finding of the court, the conclusion by the court.
Yes, well,
at least the party you represent, does it say this is serious or this is not serious?
No, we say it is serious, Chief Justice. So that's quite clear.
So what do you want to investigate?
Well, Chief Justice, does he have an explanation or not? That's the full extent of the answer to that point.
Okay.
And then the second part, of course, that must be investigated. Did he mislead Parliament?
Okay, let's park it there. In order to kill whatever it is you want to kill,
yes,
you can shoot, you can use a traditional weapon, a knife, or something else. As I understand it, just using that metaphor, your client wants to kill the president's term of office. And that can be done either through a motion of no confidence or an impeachment process. Am I right?
Yes. Well, Chief Justice, on the first part, I mean, do they want to kill the president's term of office?
They want to have him removed.
Yes, I would say, Chief Justice, that at this point in time, what is before the court is the determination of this preliminary question.
No. You see, this is all about accountability, isn't it?
Yes.
Well, let's start at the beginning.
Yes.
When a series of questions were being put to the president,
yes,
about the Nkandla issue, pursuant to the Public Protector's report, and even pursuant to the Constitutional Court judgment, was it not in an endeavor to have him account?
Yes, it was.
Is it correct that it was done 27 times?
Yes, indeed.
Right. when the DA brought a motion for impeachment, which is the same thing you want done now, was it not based on the public protector's report and the Nkandla judgment?
Yes, it was. I mean, there is, of course, a slight nuance on the DA issue, but I don't want to interrupt the flow.
But was the Nkandla judgment and the public protector's report, were they not reflected on, were they not the basis, or at least the significant basis, for bringing that impeachment motion?
Yes, that's true, Chief Justice. I mean, the only nuance that we would put on that issue by the DA is that absent a thoroughgoing examination.
No, we'll get to the investigation. I just want to understand this properly.
Yes.
And were there inhibitions in relation to the debate that preceded the voting?
Well, Chief Justice, I would say that there is, of course, a major factual gap. I mean, the point is that one cannot debate the issue in a factual vacuum.
No. With the benefit of the public protector's voluminous report, findings and remedial action, and this court's judgment, the debate took place. Parties or members of the National Assembly participated in a debate believing that there was a basis for the impeachment of the president. Or did they not believe that there was a basis based on the report and the judgment?
Yes. Now, I would accept that, Chief Justice, that when the debate took place, it took place on the basis of these, firstly, there was a judgment, and secondly, there was a report.
Exactly.
But what I would still add, Chief Justice, is that absent that inquiry...
No, we'll come to the inquiry.
Yes.
Because nobody stopped them from asking for the inquiry. They are part and parcel of the National Assembly. You can't talk about the National Assembly without including the EFF, the DA, UDM, and COPE. They are part and parcel of the National Assembly, in as much as all of my colleagues here are part and parcel of the Constitutional Court. You can't have from Justice Madlanga to Justice Katrisik Tilual in relation to this matter, bring an application and say, yeah, Mogoeng is refusing to write a judgment. They are part and parcel of it. So let's deal with that. I think it is my brother Jafta, stand to be corrected, who said, had that motion succeeded, would we be here?
Well, Chief Justice, I would submit, I mean, it's the debate we had about if the motion of no confidence succeeded.
No. Impeachment. I'm at the impeachment level.
Yes.
Well, had that motion last year already succeeded, would we be here?
Yes. Well, I would submit, Chief Justice, what would have happened, of course, is that there would have been a major constitutional oversight, because it would have happened in circumstances where there had been no Audi on the part of the president. And
no. How can there be no Audi? Had he not been asked questions before then?
Well, Chief Justice, it still remains the case, at least in our respectful submission.
So it would have been an unconstitutional impeachment?
Well, it's doubtful, because that's what we say in our application. We say that because there had been no inquiry to establish the facts, because the Constitution says serious violation, and it cannot be assumed just because there is a judgment. In fact, I wanted to refer to a judgment made by
don't
you,
refer.
Chief Justice.
No, I'm fine. Anyway, refer, but come back to my point after referring.
Yes,
had
because
that impeachment process succeeded, would we be here?
Well, I would submit that...
Because you would appreciate us, judges, we just want to know the issues
yes.
and cut to the chase. That's it.
Yes. Now, the one part I wanted to refer you to, Chief Justice, with respect, is a passage in the Nkandla judgment where the court debates the question what to do with the public protector's findings.
Yes.
And it debates in particular the reaction of the Speaker. It finds in 2 lines that it was in fact obligatory on the Speaker to satisfy themselves about the facts.
Sure.
And that it would have been unconstitutional for the Speaker to just assume that those facts that have been found by the public protector are therefore sufficiently dispositive.
Yes.
And in fact, the next line coming from that passage says that even in relation to court judgments, I just want to make sure that I don't misinterpret the point. So what I would What I would submit...
no, Justice Cameron is looking for his PA. His club.
No, I thought he was looking for me.
No. I'm the one looking for you.
So what I would submit in relation to this point is that it would not be consistent with the scheme that we are proposing.
That you are proposing, not that is in the Constitution.
No, we submit that the scheme that we are proposing is more consistent with the scheme of Section 89.
Yes.
A scheme that simply runs through Section 89 and then resolves the question by vote. What it ultimately produces is an outcome that ultimately detracts from the duty to scrutinize. The point I wanted to make about this passage is that even in circumstances where you had before you the findings by the public protector, you still said the National Assembly had to satisfy itself because it's performing a completely different function. You see, and this is the argument here. When the public protector is investigating what to do, she is discharging a responsibility under Section 181, and when the court had to decide the case, it was again discharging its judicial responsibility. The court was not deciding whether or not the president must be removed. It could not do so because the mandate is not of the judiciary to remove the president. When the matter goes to the National Assembly is discharging a different function. It is concerned with the accountability of the president. Obviously, it must take into account that there are findings made by the courts, and it must take into account that there are findings made by the public protector. But, Chief Justice, I submit with respect, it must still, in order to discharge its mandate properly, it must still satisfy itself about what are the correct facts, not whether or not the Constitutional Court was right or wrong, but what are the facts necessary for the discharge of its function? In other words, what are the facts necessary for holding the president accountable?
I'm not too sure I understand you, but let me give you another example. I'm going to give you an absurd example that makes the point.
I doubt it, Chief Justice.
Let us assume a court of law concludes that the president had in fact personally shot to death 3 people, convicts him of murder, and imposes life sentence. Well, life sentence, no. A wholly suspended sentence on him. Or whatever sentence. No, a wholly suspended sentence.
Yes.
But no, just there. So the matter comes before Parliament.
Yes.
He's not ordered to go to prison, so he's available to serve. He's not a member of Parliament, so you can't remove him on the basis that a member of Parliament is not permitted to be in Parliament if he or she has been convicted of a crime. Would the National Assembly investigate?
Yes, Chief Justice.
Whether the court was correct or not?
No, I would say even in those cases, Chief Justice, that it would still be imperative for the National Assembly, because what it is doing, it's satisfying itself about a completely different exercise. It's satisfying itself on the existence of the jurisdictional facts for removal. It's not deciding whether the president was guilty of a crime. That decision has already been made. So I would submit that in relation even to that example, that is not an absurd example because it tests the principle.
It's not a serious violation of the law to kill a person.
No, it would still be a serious violation, but the National Assembly still, and it depends on also the nature, because there could be various ways of conducting an inquiry. And it also depends, some inquiries could in fact be truncated. Gotcha. And some inquiries would be the inquiry that I propose. Yeah. And sometimes when they conduct an inquiry, all they will do is simply to look at the judgment and simply to look at the public protector report and say, we've conducted an inquiry and we are satisfied. But one can never jump the step that the National Assembly must, in the exercise of its own constitutional obligation, satisfy itself that the requirements for a removal under Section 89 have been fulfilled.
All right. How many motions of no confidence have been debated and decided upon in relation to the same issue you would want the National Assembly to conduct an investigation about? How many?
Well, Chief Justice, there is not, after the judgment of the Constitutional Court,
yes,
because that's the correct time frame.
Yes.
There is not a single one.
Not even after the, let's do it in stages then. After the public protector's report,
yes.
Any motion of no confidence in the president in relation to the Nkandla issue?
Yes. I can actually look at the facts on this.
Otherwise, you can come back later about it. And after the judgment, you say none.
There is not one motion of no confidence related to this. What had happened after the judgment, three things happened. On the 3rd of April, the Speaker released a press statement. In the press statement, the EFF says she misled the nation because she said that the Constitutional Court had not made any findings that she has acted unconstitutionally. And that is an allegation that is not disputed. And then on the 5th of April, we've debated about those. The EFF, in its own initiative, made a proposal. The DA, on the 12th of April, on its own initiative, made a proposal. But there is no motion of no confidence that has been debated after the judgment of the Constitutional Court. So we say that if one starts counting from the day the Constitutional Court gave a judgment, not one.
There's never been a motion of no confidence that has anything to do with Nkandla.
Yes, Chief Justice. It's except, of course, we are excluding from the examination the DA proposal because
the impeachment one.
Yes.
No. I'm talking section 102.
No, Chief Justice.
There's never been.
What, in fact, we know happened is that there was a subsequent motion which was based on the cabinet reshuffle.
Yes. Now, the question and answer sessions, I suppose it would be your submission, did not adequately traverse the issues pertinent to Nkandla. No. That is why there is a need for the same National Assembly to investigate those issues.
Yes, Chief Justice, I would submit with respect that what we are asking for is this thoroughgoing examination.
I'm on thoroughgoing. So their questions did not go far enough. They were not deep enough. They were all shallow. Therefore, there is another process necessary.
Well, Chief Justice, yes. What I would submit is that on the proposals that we have made of a committee that's specifically designed to deal with this matter as the only mechanism, really, that can go into the heart of the problem. There has simply never been such a process.
Yes. Now, where do we get authority from for this process that you are proposing? I've seen a reference to Brazil. I've seen a reference to the United States of America and other jurisdictions. Where is it in our law where we can find this for the court to be able to say, here is an order that is in keeping with the way in which impeachment processes are supposed to be conducted in South Africa?
Yes. Chief Justice, you would have seen, of course, from our heads of argument that our submissions are focused specifically on our constitution and our jurisprudence.
Sure.
That, of course, doesn't mean
that's for other people. Yeah, focus on your own case.
So what we do, and let's split the relief that we seek into two. The first being the declaratory order. So the declaratory order is typically a judicial function, and that declaratory order is simply aimed at clarifying that the inaction subsequent to the judgment of the Constitutional Court is a sufficient breach of the obligations of the National Assembly.
Maybe just there you'll come to the second leg. Who should act?
Well, we have submitted that if one looks at paragraph 10 as well as paragraph, I think it's 83 of the Nkandla judgment.
Yes.
The obligation rests with the National Assembly, and the head of the National Assembly is the Speaker.
Yes.
So we say that the primary obligation is that of the National Assembly, and the head of the National Assembly being the Speaker.
And your client is the National Assembly?
Well, you see, this is the point, Chief Justice.
It's not the opposition, it's the National Assembly, part and parcel of the National Assembly.
Yes, indeed, they are. The point about this argument, Chief Justice, is that it's inappropriate for the representative of the National Assembly, that is the Speaker, essentially to subdivide the function into a constituent part of the National Assembly when she is, in fact, the constitutionally appointed body that is responsible for this. And one of the interesting bits about this is that if one looks at the proposals that are currently serving before the National Assembly right now, LT5 to the current answering affidavit, it is envisaged that the Speaker must decide whether there is a prima facie case of an impeachable offense under Section 89. Their own proposals contemplate precisely what we are asking for.
Let's deal with what we have. Let's forget about something that may or not be or may not become the rules.
Yes.
Every member of the National Assembly has an obligation to ensure that the executive is held accountable.
Yes.
It is not the sole responsibility of any party or the Speaker. Am I right?
Well, Chief Justice, I would say that there is a specific obligation on the head of the Assembly.
What about the obligations of individual members of the Assembly or members of the National Assembly as a collective to make sure that they run their own affairs in line with Section 57 and not have others do what they're supposed to do for them?
Yes, we would accept that entirely, because even our own proposal doesn't detract from that, because we accept that the accountability holding mechanisms must be established by the National Assembly.
Why don't you go to the Speaker, since she has rejected the proposal about judges having to be involved, and say, Speaker, you know, the SABC process was actually wonderful. I see that it's in some of your documents. It was wonderful. We abandoned that one that has failed about judges getting involved. In fact, we can run our own show. We propose an ad hoc committee.
Well,
assuming that there hasn't been a thoroughgoing investigation. Why don't you do that?
Yes. Chief Justice, let me...
Why should the court be the one to do it?
Well, firstly, on the first part of the declaratory order, that issue is not implicated at all.
Yes.
Because the declaratory order focuses on what has happened so far and simply determines whether or not what has happened so far is constitutionally sufficient or not. The second part...
No. Which is what?
Well, what has happened so far, in other words, whether the conduct of the Speaker so far has been such that it breaches the constitutional obligations.
Is it open to a member of the, or a portion of the National Assembly to come and say that?
Yes, well,
when they are not forbidden from doing what needs to be done to kickstart that process?
What I do submit, Chief Justice, is that what has actually happened so far is more than adequate.
Yes.
The proposal by the DA was sufficient. The proposal by the EFF, if looked in good faith, and if looked at the substance, was more than adequate. Okay. And that's why we're entitled to the declaratory order.
Yes.
The question really arises in relation to paragraphs 5 and 6, which is the mandatory order. Should the court order the constitution of the ad hoc subcommittee that we are asking for? Or should the court, as the Speaker now says, refer the matter back to the Speaker for her own decision? But I would submit that, unlike in the secret ballot case, what we have here illustrates that, in fact, the court can step in at this stage, because two motions have been brought. A specific motion by the EFF has been brought, asking for an investigation, which has
last year.
Yes, it was brought.
April.
Yes.
Over a year later, you come and say we must remember this is urgent in nature.
Well, Chief Justice, we brought the application sometime this year, I think in March.
Yes. Almost a year.
Yes, but you recall, Chief Justice, that in September, there was a further reminder on the 12th of September by Mr. Shivambu. There was a further reminder to the Speaker. But
how many months since a reminder of what? Was an answer not received yet?
Yes, well, the answer was received on the 12th of May.
So?
The reminder about what the EFF's demand is.
Yes.
And Chief Justice, the point I suppose to make, the more important point to make really, not to get tied down into the minutiae.
Yes.
The important point to make is that the obligation started when the judgment certainly was triggered when the court delivered this judgment.
Yes.
When we speak today, that obligation has still not been fulfilled.
Yeah.
It is of paramount importance, even if not urgency, it is of paramount importance that the National Assembly subjects the President to a proper system of accountability. The mere fact that there has been a passage of time compounds the problem. It does not exculpate him. It just makes it worse.
What does it stop the EFF or any party represented in Parliament, as has been the case with motions of no confidence, to again approach the Speaker and say, you know, Speaker, I know we've had an impeachment debate. We want you to set up an ad hoc committee, or we've done our investigation. We now want another debate on impeachment now that we have familiarized ourselves properly with the issues. Does that stop any of the members of the National Assembly from doing that?
Yes. Well, Chief Justice, I mean, had the EFF not made the request and then sent the reminder, the answer would have been, of course, we have not been. What we do know is that the Speaker has refused to conduct this inquiry.
Yes.
I mean, it's not as if there has been no attempt to make the request. It has been made and refused.
For what it is worth, let me explain my difficulty to you, Mr. Mukaitobi. You know, we are three arms of the state, and we each have a role to play in making our constitutional democracy function and function well. I just want to make sure that I understand the issue so well that this court doesn't get to the point where it takes over the responsibility of the National Assembly to the point of saying, establish this kind of investigative structure, and these are the terms of reference. Because once we make that order, they are not the terms of reference coming from members of the National Assembly. They are the court-prescribed terms of reference. I just have a discomfort. That's why I just want to make sure that I understand what you are saying and what the basis for that are.
Yes. Well, Chief Justice, could I make the following suggestion in relation to this point? I've already explained that paragraphs 2 to 4 of our notice of motion is a declaratory order. That is the function of the court. There can be no separation of powers debate there. The court could issue that declaratory order and simply not give paragraphs 5 and 6 if there is a concern about separation of powers. But it is still my submission that in this case, where there is in fact no dispute, and we appreciate the concern about separation of powers, but in this case, where there is no dispute about the propriety of the suggestion that we make, there should be no reason why the court should be concerned.
No dispute between who and who?
Between us and the Speaker.
Well, maybe you must go home and then sort out your issues. Rather than drag the court into what you are agreed on.
No, this is the problem exactly, is that if they themselves in their own affidavit say that they don't see a problem with the order they seek, that we seek, why don't they just concede it?
Well, why didn't, maybe it shows that you didn't discuss the issues, your internal issues, as thoroughly as you should have.
Yes.
You chose to come to court.
Yes. Well, Chief Justice, I mean, I've made the submission that once we made our request and it was refused, we were then entitled to come to court.
Let me ask this question, Mr. Mukaitobi. If we arrive at the conclusion that, that the decision of this court in Kandla can only lead to the conclusion that the President had committed a serious violation of the Constitution or the law. Would it still be open to us to order the investigation you have in mind? If we arrive at the conclusion that the only way, the proper meaning of our decision, assuming that we were ever to come to that conclusion, is that that constitutes a serious violation of the Constitution or the law, would there still be any room for saying, no, go and investigate, and these are the terms of reference? We just want to make sure that the President is treated fairly. That's you know, he must be given the opportunity to answer.
Yes. Well, Chief Justice, I would submit that the finding that there has been seriousness, again, does not displace the obligation on the National Assembly to consider, this is what we propose, to consider what this means for the Section 89 process. So if a judgment came from the court probably, I mean, on the terms that, as I understand, are being proposed by the Chief Justice, we don't want to tie the hands of the National Assembly. It must still exercise its constitutional function. Because there are two things that appear from Section 89. The one is may, which is discretionary. In other words, the mere existence of those requirements is itself not dispositive. But even the very question whether those requirements, A and B, exist, it's something that the National Assembly must itself decide for its own purposes.
Okay, let me put it this way. Do you know of a party in Parliament that believes, in the National Assembly that believes, based on the debates around the impeachment process, based on the question and answer sessions relating to the Nkandla matter, that believes that the decision of this court in the Nkandla matter does not justify a conclusion that there has been a serious violation of the Constitution or the law?
Well,
do you know of any? Because somebody must be doubting that for an investigation to be necessary.
Well, Chief Justice, it's clearly possible that there are
No. Do you know of any?
Well, there is nothing on these papers before us.
Does your client doubt?
Yes, of course, my client is quite clear on the matter.
So, what does your client want to investigate?
Well, this is the point, is that ultimately there has to be an establishment of whether there is a prima facie case under Section 89. That is what we've come to court to ask for. So, if you look at the terms of reference we've proposed, does the conduct of the President lead to the conclusion that he is prima facie guilty of an impeachable offense? That question also depends on what he has to say, Chief Justice. And it does not depend only on what the court has to say. We would say that
it depends on what Parliament, what the National Assembly makes of what transpired, makes of his conduct. That's it.
Yes, Chief Justice, but I would still say that it also depends in part on how they treat his own evidence before them.
If one ground is good enough, do you need to explore many other possible grounds, like whether he lied, whether he knew, and so on?
Well, on what we have proposed,
I just want to understand the premise from which EFF, and I'll deal with other parties, the basis, the premise from which it moves.
Yeah. On what we have suggested, Chief Justice, both grounds, because both grounds are in fact interlinked, because the reason he misled Parliament in our submission had to do with the very issue about whether or not he enriched himself at the expense of the nation.
No, that I understand. I want to, I reflect on the judgment for myself, I want to know, does your client, the EFF, have a doubt about whether the President's conduct, in view of the Public Protector's report and this court's judgment, amounts to a serious violation of the Constitution or the law? Does it have a doubt on that point alone?
We don't have a doubt. It's clear to us. That's what we say in our
So you don't want any investigation on that point?
Well, Chief Justice, what we do want an investigation on is what does he have to say for himself?
Okay.
And we also want an investigation into, did he lie to Parliament or not?
Yes. Okay.
And that has been no finding by this court on that issue.
Sure.
But, Chief Justice, that does not detract from the seriousness of the conduct. I mean, I don't want to leave the court with the impression that we don't think that the findings made by this court are serious.
Yes.
It is precisely because we think the findings made by the court are serious that we say that the President must be subjected to a thoroughgoing investigation so that he can explain himself.
Yes. Well, I think I must thank you.
Thank you, Chief Justice.
Thank you, Mr. The court will take a break for about 15 minutes.
15.
Okay, so what are we going to do about lunch?
I don't think, no, it's going to, yeah, it's going to go on.
Yeah.